Chapter 4. A Little Warmer. Kikamura followed me downstairs as I led her to the kitchen. You could still hear Reedna happily watching the television from the other room, the audio level fairly modest. I walked to the refrigerator and opened it, pondering what I would make the girl. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see the blonde curiously looking around the room. Everything seemed to be of interest when it came to her. "You can sit down at the counter," I suggested, partially to give her direction, but mostly so she'd stop snooping around. I'd never met someone who was so eager to start familiarizing themselves with someone else's house. Personally, I'd at least show some restraint. "Oh, okay," she smiled, spinning around and climbing into a seat at the granite countertop. I looked back at her. The girl had her elbows on the counter surface, hands pressed against the back of her neck, her fingers threading through her hair. She blinked slowly as she inspected the room with only her eyes, rocking side to side in silence. I looked back to the refrigerator and finally decided what I was going to make. It was best if I introduced her to my hobby with what I did best, and that, of course, was baking. "Are you okay with chocolate?" I asked, pulling out some butter and eggs. I decided to make something creamy and sweet. Nothing overpowering, but something I was proud of. "Of course, chocolate is great," she beamed, stretching her arms out over the countertop and twiddling her fingers against the surface. I looked back and nodded before continuing my search for all the items I needed. Time to get started then. I started by melting some butter and chocolate together over the stove, whisking in some sugar once it had melted together. After taking it off the burner, I waited for the mixture to cool off and started mixing together some flour, cocoa powder, and salt. It took me a little while to make, but judging by the way the small girl looked at me in awe, I didn't have to worry about her being bored. I folded the powder mixture into my cooled chocolate batter and poured it into a rectangular pan before sliding it into the oven. With step 1 done, I moved on to step 2 and prepared a variety of chocolate mousse. While I worked on that, my timer went off for the oven and I pulled out the cooked brownies, letting them cool. Once I finished my mousse, I loaded it into piping bags and cut the brownies into circular shapes, separating them all on a parchment sheet. I wrapped some tall parchment paper around each circular brownie and then proceeded to layer the mousse inside, one flavor at a time. When I'd filled it, I shaved some chocolate on top and then placed the desserts in the freezer. As I worked, I kind of forgot Kikamura was even there. She was quiet the whole time, only making small noises and humming at things I did. I had melted into my world of baking and felt recovered from today's tense conversation, relaxing fully as I worked. "We just have to wait for it to chill a little in the freezer, and then it'll be ready," I spoke for the first time in an hour, releasing myself from my oasis. I looked to Kikamura and shrugged, not sure what else to say. Her cheeks rose with another grin, and she sat upright, hands planted in her lap. "I can't wait," she said in her usual chipper tone, blinking and looking at the mess I'd left. "And I should clean up." I began picking up the dirty dishes and started to rinse everything off from the left side of the sink, setting it to the right side once done. "You looked so focused, Emochi, like you had left to another planet and came back once everything was finished." That was an interesting way of putting it. I started to wonder, though, did I really seem to space off that much? Hikamura smiled again. "So what you said before, does that mean it wasn't your mom who made all your lunches? Instead it was you?" The blonde's eyes got big, catching my own for a moment before I looked away and washed the dishes in the soapy water. "Yeah, I make my and Reedna's..." She probably didn't know my brother by name, actually. "My brother's lunches every morning. It's pretty fun." My fingers slipped over a dish and I used my other hand to grab it before it splashed into the water. My mom works a lot, so she doesn't do a lot of cooking. "Wow," Kikamura said in awe, leaning forward again and resting her arms on the granite. Her chin sat atop them. "You're more interesting than I thought." I almost took offense to what she said. I wasn't interesting at all before. Did she really not expect anything else from me? Clearing my throat, I finished rinsing the dishes and drained the soapy water. I picked up a towel and started to dry the dishes, speaking up again. "I'm not really that interesting, but I won't argue with you." I shrugged. Enough time had passed, so I decided to take out the dessert. Setting down a dish on my drying rack, I walked to the freezer and opened it. pulling out 2 mini chocolate treats. Unraveling the paper from around both of them, I set them on the counter along with a small fork. I had made the dish before, so I knew I wasn't going to be surprised by the taste, so I let Kikamura try it first. Ooh! Her eyes lit up at the sight, and she quickly reached for her fork. Leaning in close to the dessert, she eyed the layers of mousse and poked the chocolate shavings on top with her utensil before giggling to herself. How did you make it look so good? I only shrugged in response and awaited her to dig in. Her eyes went back to mine, and as if telling her to go ahead, I nodded and leaned my head in the direction of my creation. She nodded back, her blonde hair jostling slightly at the movement. Without another moment's delay, she slid her fork down the side of the chocolate treat and got a little bit of every layer in the bite. Bringing it towards her mouth, Kikamura chomped down on it and let her fork slide back out. Almost instantly, her eyes lit up brighter than before, despite me not thinking it was possible, and she brought her little hands into fists. The sound of squealing could be heard behind her full lips, and I couldn't help myself from grinning, much wider than I thought I would have. I raised a hand to my mouth, embarrassed and hiding my grin as much as I possibly could, as I watched her gulp down the bite. Mochi! What? Her eyes almost looked misty, looking straight into mine. Her voice was nothing short of pouty. How are you so good? How is this so good? Kikamura shook her head in disbelief and quickly shoved another bite in her mouth, squeaking as she chewed into it. Her eyes shut, and one of her hands placed itself on her cheek, humming as she finished the bite. I hadn't even touched my dessert yet, but I wasn't prepared for such an extreme reaction, so it had taken me off guard. Through all that, a huge smile was stretched across my lips, and I couldn't bear to lower my hand to reveal my amusement. It was a bit embarrassing to hear it up front like that, but I also felt thankful the girl had taken a liking to my sweets at all. The rushing feeling was very similar to how I felt when observing others at the cafe, but this time it was a bit more intense since the person was literally right in front of me. It was a good feeling. I didn't respond to Kikamura vocally, finally trying to wipe the huge grin off of my face and enjoy my own dessert as well. Ah yes, it was just as good as I remembered it being. Soft and moist, the mousse had a good texture and the flavors weren't too overpowering. The whole thing coming together as a sweet delicacy. Mochi, this is so good! Kikamura's words came between bites, and before long she had finished all of it. It really had been a long time since someone had complimented me up front in person. Usually all my compliments were heard from afar or were said by my brother, but even then, Rina's reactions weren't as grand as hers. Thanks, I finally mumbled out, finishing my dessert shortly afterwards. Kikamura grinned at me. Didn't know you were so good at something like this. Are you a professional? I don't know how the situation had turned around so quickly, but I found myself actually having a decent time around the girl. The conversation was all about me, so maybe that was why, though. No, it's mostly just a hobby, I told her with a shrug. I wouldn't say I was the best bakery chef out there. There were many others that excelled in areas I struggled with, that was for sure. But I was still young, too. Only time would tell. Speaking of time, it seemed to have passed rather quickly, and the sound of our front door opening could be heard. I suddenly felt really nervous. I hadn't had friends over before, especially not anyone like the hyper blonde. Welcome home, I spoke out to my father, trying to ignore any emotions that were slowly trying to rise to the surface. Whatever they weren't going to help me then. Sighing, my father sat down on his bag and nodded in my direction. He looked pretty exhausted. Long day? I asked, frowning. He looked at me and chuckled bitterly. Every day. With that, he walked into the kitchen and nearly jumped at the sight of an unknown person inside his home, peering at him. Raising an eyebrow, he turned back to me. Who is this? I couldn't bear to hold his gaze at that point, so I looked down. This is Purupi Kikamura. She's a classmate, I told him in my usual tone. He slowly nodded and turned back towards the inside of the kitchen. Oh, well, welcome, Purupi. I'm Kishka's father. He wasn't too formal and quickly invited himself to the refrigerator, searching for something to eat. He made some desserts if you want a snack. The blonde beamed from her place at the counter. Her intention may have been innocent, but my father didn't look too pleased at the suggestion and frowned. Must have been another bad day at work. He opened the freezer and caught a glimpse of what I'd made not long before. Long ago, before shutting the door to the freezer. Ah, so this is what you were up to today. My father spoke, belittling me with his tone. I mentioned before that my parents didn't mind that I worked at a cafe, which was true. However, whenever I did a lot of baking at home, they liked to remind me that spending my time on it was a waste. I couldn't help but feel bad at his words, even if they probably didn't sound harmful from an outsider's perspective. Kishka, you took time off of work to take care of your brother, not to have friends over. Ouch. Like I'd been punched in the gut, I lost all air in my lungs and didn't know how to respond. It's not as if I had friends over all the time. And it wasn't like I slacked off all the time either. Yet my father insinuated such a thing, and it really stung. Actually, Kikamura came over to give me my homework from school. She had walked all this way, so I made her something as thanks. I tried to cover for myself, stretching the truth a little so maybe he would ease up. It didn't work that well, though, and he sighed, turning back to face me. He completely ignored the fact that we had a guest over and continued to speak in my direction. Maybe you should go work on that homework then. Do you really have time to be wasting right now? I understand if it's reading, but... I was growing frustrated the more he spoke. It was one thing that he was talking so crossly with me, but it was a whole other thing to make our guest feel invisible. I couldn't bring myself to look Hikamura's way, so I just stared at the ground while trying to think of a response. You're right. I pushed the words out of my lips. I felt so embarrassed. While I usually gulped down my scolding, despite my internal thoughts and how I felt about it, it felt so much worse in front of another person. Especially a person I hardly knew and seemed to make a big deal out of anything I did. Not that I had a whole lot to lose, but being viewed as some sort of loser wasn't exactly on the agenda for my last year of high school. Unfortunately, this is when Kikamura decided to speak up, arguably making me feel worse about the whole situation. I have to get going anyway, actually, she chimed in, hopping out of her seat. It's already getting a bit dark out, so I shouldn't stay too much longer. She spoke with confidence, her eyes looking for mine. Our gaze met shortly before I looked away again out of habit. Don't let her walk alone, Kishka. My father scolded me in advance, as if I were to just show her the door and leave. I would never do that. I didn't respond and followed Kikamura to the door, not giving any more attention to my father as he passed behind us and shut himself in his office without another word. For once, I actually hoped he stayed there for the rest of the night. I was pretty mad. Once he shut the door behind him, I let out a small sigh. Sorry, I muttered to Kikamura, who looked up at me with big eyes and a small smile. She didn't seem bothered in the slightest. For what? You didn't do anything wrong. She giggled and slipped on her pair of shoes. I appreciate you having me, especially after all that. She giggled again, but this time a little pitifully. Oh, wait! The girl jumped up right before I started to put on my shoes, causing me to look her way. Huh? I raised an eyebrow in her direction and halted my motion. She looked a little bashful and pressed her hands together in a timid fashion. Her eyes averted mine, which was a first. I forgot my bag in your room. Can you grab it for me? Her words pleaded. I don't see why not. I nodded at her and dropped my shoes back down, turning around and walking upstairs. I picked up her bag from my room and glanced at the pile of homework I had to attend to. I'll worry about them when I get home. Once I came back downstairs, I grabbed both her coat and mine and put on my shoes before we left out the front door. Most of the walk was fairly silent, only the sound of the fresh snow under our shoes as we moved. It had snowed a bit over the day, and by the looks of it, it had only recently stopped. Drink some water. Thanks for having me over and making me such a nice treat. It was super good. I hope you didn't think I was playing it up or anything. Hikamura spoke earnestly, laughing a little when she had finished her thought. Thank you for coming to give me my homework. You didn't have to do that. My eyes stared at the snow below, watching us leave footprints behind as we walked. And I appreciate your words from before. I blinked. It felt weird to voice my feelings like that. Usually, I would have just thought these things when people would compliment me indirectly and hoped they knew how I felt. But now, being up But being up close with someone meant having to speak those feelings, or else it'd be a one-way conversation. It was harder than I remembered it being. Of course, Kikamura beamed. What are friends for? Friends? Were we friends? Not that it was a bad thing. Just felt weird to hear the girl say it so casually like that. I felt the blood rush to my face, and I found myself at a loss for words. What do you say after that? Thank you? Wait. She already thought we were friends. It'd be awkward if I said something like thank you as a response, right? Maybe it was okay if I didn't say anything at all. Anyway, Kikamura suddenly spoke up, which made me jump. I looked over to her, noticing that she'd stopped walking. We were near the train station. This is far enough for me. Geez, she took a train all the way here? I felt even worse, now knowing that she had to travel. See you at school, okay? Yeah. See you on Monday, I responded, moving my hand back to scratch at my neck, despite there being a scarf wrapped around it. Kikamura smiled back, her eyes curving under her cheekbones as she did. With that, she spun around and walked to the station. Once she was out of sight, I turned around and started to walk back home. Once home, I told Rena to eat some food and set himself to bed once our mother got home. I also started on my pile of homework. Maybe my father was right to scold me. If Kikamura had stayed longer, I wouldn't have been able to focus on my school as much. But still, I glared at the pile. My father didn't have to say it like he did, especially in front of a guest no less. I continued to glare at my school papers at the thought, but soon took a deep breath to calm my emotions. I needed to focus on the task at hand. Taking out the papers for one particular class, I began reading it over. I don't really understand what I'm reading. Maybe because there was so much going on that day, I was too mentally exhausted and didn't understand the context of the work. I wasn't sure, so I decided to refer back to the previous chapter to find context for what was being talked about in the current one. But even when I did, I still found myself lost. I didn't get what I was reading at all. What the hell? I shut my book and set my stuff folder onto my desk while deciding to call it a night. I was getting nowhere. It was probably best if I rested and started on it early the next morning and into Sunday. Then I'd probably actually get somewhere. It was Monday. My first day back at school was going by pretty well. In fact, Kikamura hadn't come to talk to me before class at all, which was kind of nice. Not having to engage in socialization at the very beginning of the day made me feel a lot more at ease. It was also a bit warmer that day, so much so that the snow outside had started to melt, which also made me feel a lot nicer. It wasn't even December yet, so having all the snow and cold temperatures already left me in a sour mood. Once lunch had rolled around, Kikamura broke the silence and joined me once more, bringing her desk over against mine. Good afternoon, Mochi, she beamed, bringing her chair over to sit across from me. She pulled out her lunch first, which was something plain yet again. Not surprised. That morning, I actually made a conscious effort to not make anything too elaborate, mostly so the blonde wouldn't call too much of her attention to it. However, my effort seemed to do the exact opposite. Whoa, your lunch is super different this time, Mochi, she said in surprise, slowly chomping at her plain rice. I, too, had plain rice, with just a few vegetables on the side. It seemed that no matter what I did, though, the blonde always had something to say. I didn't respond, and also took a bite of my rice, fishing my water bottle out of my backpack with my other hand. Oh yeah, the blonde seemed to remember something, lighting up and grinning. The holidays are coming up. Do you do anything special with your family during that time? I shook my head at her. Not really, I said flatly, finishing another bite of rice. I come up with a bunch of seasonal items for the cafe I work at, though, and that can be pretty fun. At that, the girl nearly jumped up, her eyes becoming wide in surprise. I forgot to mention that I worked at a cafe tour, didn't I? Wow! You really are a good baker if you work at a cafe! I had no idea! Kikamura sat in awe for a few moments before giggling. I'll have to come visit sometime. Which one do you work at? Already, she was quick to yammer on and immediately began firing questions my way. I suddenly had a mental image of Kikamura coming to the cafe, screaming my name and desiring to hang out with me as she ate. That, of course, wasn't possible for me to do in my position. It also sounded like a terrifying possibility as well. Well, Don't forget that I work in the back, so if you stop by, you probably won't see me at all. Hikamura didn't look bothered by the information, however, shrugging with her regular smile. That's fine. To be honest, I just want to stop by to try some more of your sweets. She laughed once more, even though I didn't really know why. Everything seemed to be funny to her. All right, well, I work at Cafe Misty, the one a few blocks away from my house. It's in the opposite direction of the station, I explained, deciding to not hold back from telling her where I worked. While I certainly had a concern that she might barge in and be loud, I felt she was harmless enough that maybe another stern talking would fix her right up, if need be. Anyway, the cafe that I worked at wasn't all that huge, but it was fairly popular. It luckily had enough space to comfortably suit up to 3 or 4 waitresses working at once, but not too big to where you felt intimidated walking in or around the place. Oh, I haven't been there before. I'll stop by sometime for sure. Hikamura beamed before setting both of her hands on her hips, changing her usual grin for a mischievous one. I'll make sure to put you to work. With those words, I couldn't help but smile. If she really did want to work me ragged at the cafe, I would love every second of it. I kind of looked forward to it. I'm gonna drink some tea. All right, here we go. After school, I began my usual walk, heading in the direction of Reedna's school. I knew that he was getting older, and I didn't need to walk him home every day, but it was cold, and he was still pretty small. He didn't even have a house key of his own yet. Plus, I felt more comfortable knowing he got home safe every day. One day, I knew he wouldn't want me to walk him home anymore, so I wanted to take advantage of the opportunity while I still could. I zoned out on my walk, ignoring my other classmates who walked around me on their way home too. It wasn't until I saw a familiar blue hue in the corner of my eye that I looked up and focused on the world around me. It was Runaka, the man who helped me get Reedna home the other week. Oh, hey, I greeted him, hands buried in my pockets to keep them away from the cold. It was warmer, but not enough to expose my hands to the outside air for too long. Hey, Gishka, you never responded to my text, man, he said, putting an arm out and wrapping it around my shoulders. The sudden contact and use of first name made me uncomfortable, but it was obvious that he didn't notice. Oh, he did text me, didn't he? It was a simple, hey, but it was in the middle of the week while I was still tending to Reedna, so I'd forgotten to reply back. Sorry, I mumbled back. Despite having his arm around me, the blue-haired man kept up with my pace and walked beside me. He chuckled, making it clear that he was not bothered, or at the very least was good at hiding it. No big deal, just wanted to check in on you and your bro and see how you're doing. You doing any better? Runaka inquired. Oh, yeah, I stammered in response. Ugh. It's still weird being spoken to so familiar-like by others, especially by Runaka. I knew close to nothing about him, but he did do me a big favor, so I figured the least I could do was act friendly until it became a hassle. It didn't help how awkward I felt, though, and, well, how awkward I already was. I wasn't really good at hiding it, either. He's better and back at school. I'm going to go pick him up now, I replied. Runaka nodded, and then removed his arm from around me, patting my back a little harder than I expected. Ugh. Glad to hear that, man. I'm so happy I met you when I did. I hate to think you would have had to deal with that situation all by yourself, you know? He laughed heartily. I probably would have figured out an alternative solution if that were the case. I shrugged. Even though I said it, I wasn't sure if that would have been the case at all. I probably would have just taken Reedna home in the cold and took the risk of getting him sicker. I was lucky Runaka helped me out when he did. Sure, Runaka said with a roll of his eyes. Anyway, I just wanted to check up on you and make sure things were cool. We should get together during your winter break. The sudden invite threw me off guard, and I wasn't sure how to feel about it. It wasn't like I especially wanted to do something with him, nor was it that I especially didn't want to. I just wasn't expecting him to come out and say it so openly. Maybe it was just by luck that the 2 people I'd gotten to know lately were so outgoing. Or maybe I really was weird. Did people normally invite each other out after just barely knowing them? Well, I guess people ask each other out on dates without knowing one another too, right? I don't know. Don't ask me. I'd never been on one. A date, that is. I didn't like to admit it, but it was the truth. I was inexperienced on all social levels, but it didn't stop me from being happy. It really didn't, and I didn't need it. But at the same time, I didn't exactly hate my socializing with Renaka at that moment either. It was just strange and different. Sure, I accepted the invite out, even if nothing bad had been solidified yet. Even if nothing had been solidified yet. Like I told Kikamura, my family and I didn't really do anything for Christmas. So, aside from work, the holiday season left my schedule fairly open. Alright, well, my truck is still back at the shop, so I gotta get back. Nice talking to you, though. Glad everything's alright. And with that, Runaka gave me one final pat in the back and dashed back the way he came. Why would he walk in the opposite direction of where he needed to be just to talk to me? He could have just sent another text. Bewildered by the man, I shook my head and kept walking. Time to get my brother. I was having a group meeting with my boss at the cafe that afternoon. We were discussing holiday specials that we were considering putting on the menu. Just like last year, my boss was leaving most of the baked goods and sweet specials up to me, so it was my responsibility to come up with some new and fun ideas that would interest our customers. Based off of the previous year's sales, yearly popular items, and holiday favorites, I was able to come up with a confident list to present to him that afternoon. I was pretty excited about it. My boss left the task up to me entirely, and while some might think that was intimidating, for me it was an absolute honor. It allowed me to be creative and show off my ideas in an actual cafe instead of just on paper or at home. It went pretty well the previous year too. Regardless, we still had to have a meeting about it to discuss all of my ideas and find out which ones we'd bring in for sure. I had a clipboard in my hand which held some notepaper as well as some sheets that had some small illustrations on them. It wasn't until last year that I started taking an interest in coming up with my own recipes and bakery designs. I mostly just baked pre-existing recipes and memorized my favorites, but ever since the year before, I took an interest in the creation process a lot more. I glanced down at my scribbly, messy sketches. While I admit I wasn't the best artist, I was good enough to get my thoughts across, and that was all that really mattered during that stage anyway. It was a slow day, so the meeting was held out on the cafe floor, us sitting at one of the tables. Sitting there was my boss, our lead bakery chef, and myself. I cleared my throat a little before sliding a sketch to the middle of the table, reading from my clipboard. So, I was thinking of doing chocolate peppermint cupcakes for the grab-and-go set. Peppermint was a popular choice last year, and we quickly ran out of giftable items, so I thought having more would be nice. I began, eyes glued to the recipe on the paper. It'd be made with a rich and fluffy icing that has bits of peppermint inside. The cupcake itself would have peppermint extract and chocolate chunks in it as well. Chocolate was a high seller last year too, so I figured putting the two together wasn't a bad idea. My eyes lifted from the paper to the other two at the table, looking for any objections. My boss simply nodded at me with a smile, which meant to keep going. So I did. I listed off every single one of my ideas, each accompanied with an illustration. It ranged from cheesecakes to cookies to even small chocolate sweets. I had recently taken an interest in making truffles, and while we hadn't tried anything like that at the cafe before, I wasn't going to let go of an opportunity to try to bring it in. My boss continually nodded at each of my ideas, and once I was done, I set the clipboard down in front of me and looked to him and the lead bakery chef for feedback. That's it, I spoke in closing. I then noticed a small smile had rested on my lips. How long have I been smiling? I must have been caught up in all of my explaining and started daydreaming about my ideas while I spoke. What could I say? That sort of stuff made me happy. My boss smiled wider. Let me drink some water. Where did I stop? I think I stopped. Oh, here. The lead baker chef for feedback. That's it. Oh, sorry. I lost my place. My boss smiled wider. Those sound great, Kishka. You really put a lot of thought into this, haven't you? His words made me feel a little embarrassed. He wasn't wrong, but it made me feel strange to have him pick up on it. Yes, I stammered unintentionally, making me feel even more embarrassed. My boss chuckled and stood up from his seat, picking up the sketches I'd laid on the table. These all look fantastic. It really sounds like you did your research, too. I'm really proud of you for putting so much passion into this. I can tell it really makes you happy. The compliments flooded in, and I felt my face heat up. Surely I was bright red at that point. I looked down at my lap and raised a hand to rub at the back of my neck, feeling much too embarrassed to look him in the eyes. This reaction only seemed to make him laugh more. You're so bashful. Come on, take pride for what you do. The man then walked over to my seat and set a hand on my shoulder. My head tilted up to look at my boss as he did, trying my best not to make any sort of strange expression. Maintaining my usual stare was hard like that, though, so I pressed my lips together in a way to distract myself. I don't think we can feasibly bring in every single one of these ideas this year alone, so I'm going to have to go through them and decide what we're doing, but I'll hold on to the rest for next year. Were they really that good to him? I knew that I was excited about my ideas, but I didn't actually know if they were any good from a professional standpoint. Thank you, boss. I hadn't said anything in a little while, and figured I should speak my mind before it got weird. If you're sure there aren't any adjustments that need to be made, it would, I looked away from him, looking to the lead bakery chef now. It'd be an honor to bring these items into the cafe. I was really thankful that I was given such an opportunity, but I couldn't help but feel nervous that he said he liked every single one so much. Maybe he was just being nice and didn't want to hurt my feelings. What do you think, Mudaki? My boss looked to the leader of the bakery, Mudaki, smiling and handing her the pile of sketches to look at. She took the stack and quickly thumbed through the images. She smiled and shrugged, looking to me with an arched eyebrow. I don't even know why you're asking me. This kid is probably better than I am. The young woman let out a small giggle, setting the papers back down on the table. My eyes dropped back down to my lap, the heat not vanishing from my cheeks for even a second. Was this reality? I didn't leave school early just to be praised heavily from my superiors at work. I was expecting at least a critique or two. Are you sure there isn't anything you needed changed with these? I spoke up again, looking to my boss who had sat back at his seat. The man smiled and shrugged once more, lifting both palms in the air as he did. Maybe, but honestly everything you mentioned sounded perfect. You might need to do some trial runs just to make sure everything is as good as it sounds, though. He winked at that, reaching out and grabbing the clipboard from the table. I actually did test runs of all the items before presenting them to you, I admitted. When my parents were still at work, I gave each of the recipes a try and made a batch. To be honest, I still had tons of leftovers. I could bring them in if you'd like to try them. Almost immediately, my boss let rip a huge laugh. Tears sprung from the corners of his eyes, and he quickly wiped them as he struggled to catch his breath. Kishka, you're really amazing, you know that? His voice cracked in between laughter. Uh-huh. His words took me completely off guard, and I leaned back in my chair, pouting. What do you mean? I really didn't get it. Nothing. The man shook his head and took a deep breath before speaking once more. Anyway, since you went through all the trouble of whipping that up at home without industry standard appliances, I assume, please bring them into work tomorrow so we can all give them a try. All? Was he going to make everyone at work try my demo dishes? God, I don't think it would have been possible to feel more embarrassed than in that moment. That's what my boss wanted. I wouldn't argue. Also, it's not like I would have been able to finish all of the demo batches, even with Reedna's help. Sure, I mumbled, a small smile setting on the corner of my lips, while my hand scratched at the back of my neck. My boss was really kind. He was a little bit over the top and could be really strict sometimes, but he did his job well, and really made all of his employees feel wanted and welcome. I loved it. With that decided, the three of us spoke about some other holiday details and began to wrap up our meeting. It was nearing the time our next rush would begin, so we didn't want to take up table space. As we continued to talk, the door to the cafe jingled open, a customer entering the cafe. I didn't look to see who it was, since the sound of a waitress greeting them was next to be heard. I didn't have much interest in who all came inside anyway. I only really cared if they ate my creations or not. However, I managed to overhear a little bit of the conversation between the customer and the waitress. The customer's voice sounded familiar. I turned around and took a peek at the person who just entered, almost jumping when I recognized it as Kikamura. It was weird seeing her out of school, even if she was still in our uniform. I guess I saw her in normal clothes at my house too, though. Maybe it was only weird because she was at my workplace. Regardless, I spun back around and refocused on the meeting with my boss in Mudaki. I already told Kikamura that I probably wouldn't even see her if she stopped by, but there I was, sitting out in the open. I got a little distracted, caught up in all my thoughts, that I wasn't even paying attention to the meeting. My boss was the first to break me out of my frenzied thoughts, calling my name. Ishka, he spoke. I sat up on my seat and immediately looked at him. Geez. Yeah, I spoke, a bit frazzled and embarrassed. I'd spaced out. It was then that he pointed behind me, smiling widely as he did. That girl was just waving at you. Is she a classmate of yours? Why did she have to go and attract my boss's attention like that? I should have expected Kikamura to blow her cover right away. I didn't know why I was surprised. Again, my face burned with embarrassment. I felt like I was going to end up passing out if it kept happening so many times that day. Maybe. I think so. I'm not really sure, I stammered, hoping to end the off-topic conversation as soon as possible. I didn't even look behind me, not wanting to catch Kikamura's gaze. You want to go say hi before it gets busy? We're almost done here anyway, my boss inquired. I knew he was trying to be nice, but he was too nice sometimes. That's okay, I said, turning around to look Kikamura's way anyway. I probably shouldn't completely ignore her since she was brought to my attention. When I looked back, it looked like she had stopped waving and was now focused on the waitress, placing an order. Whew, she was distracted. Anyway, we can continue with the meeting, I said, turning back to my superiors. I sighed internally. We had work to do. No point in getting distracted. If you're sure, my boss said reluctantly, before he continued speaking on a few more holiday matters. Within the next 5 minutes, we were done talking and more customers had already begun to arrive. It was time to get to work. Without so much as a break, I gathered up my clipboard and headed to the back room of the bakery department. Putting on an apron, I looked ahead to see several order tickets piled in. I began to mentally sort out which order I should prep first. Of course, the tickets were placed in order, but some items needed to be prepped in advance so that they went out in a timely manner. The orders that day contained a small variety, but luckily, most things were easy to work on immediately. Washing my hands, I started to work. Before long, all my orders were completed, and I had nothing to do for the moment, which, of course, meant it was time to spy on the customers. Well, I mostly wanted to spy on Kikamura and find out what items she'd ordered. About a fourth of the cafe had been filled with people, so finding her was a little trickier than I'd thought initially, but her blonde hair made her stand out, so I was able to find her within a minute's time. The girl sat there with a miniature cake I'd fixed up not long before then, drinking a milk tea and nibbling on some decorated sugar cookies that the bakery had made 2 days prior. With a twist of her wrist, the blonde cut a piece of her cake and quickly stuffed it in her mouth. Within seconds, her shoulder raised, her eyes shut, and her legs flailed from under the table. Her animated response immediately made a smile erupt from my previous emotionless stare, and I set my head on the wall in bliss. The girl's hands rose to her face, and she did a little dance in her chair before gulping down the bite and rushing her fork in for another. This continued several times, almost identically, until the sweet was finished. Kikamura drinking down her tea in between bites. What a silly girl. I turned around and headed back into the kitchen, just in time for new orders to start piling in. Good timing. The day was going so well. I didn't know what I did to deserve such a nice day, but I wasn't going to take it for granted and slack off. Using my happiness and excitement as fuel, I quickly got to work and started on the next order. My shift was over for the day, earlier than usual because of the meeting, so I was kind of excited to get going before the temperature dropped any lower. Saying goodbye to my coworkers, I gathered my belongings and left the back room, entering onto the cafe floor. It had calmed down a lot as the evening went on, and now there were mostly just studying students at the tables, with the occasional teenage group of friends. I hadn't seen Kikamura when she had left because of how busy it ended up getting in my department, but I assumed she'd probably left shortly after I'd watched her consume her dessert. Regardless, I was just thankful she'd heeded my words from before and didn't make a scene or call after me while I was there. Maybe she really was a good person after all. Heading towards the front door with my coat and scarf on, backpack in hand, I used my other hand to open the door and thrust myself out of it. However, in doing so, I ran right into another person who had been on the other side of the door, likely a customer who was attempting to come inside. The velocity from behind my step was enough to knock the person in front of me off of their feet and onto the ground behind them. Uh-oh. That wasn't supposed to happen. Immediately, I stammered to apologize, feeling my mood drop as it was replaced with guilt. I really should have paid attention. I'm sorry, I should have looked before coming out like that. My eyes dropped to the person in front of me, who now sat on their behind on the concrete pathway that led up to the business. It was a young woman, a pretty one at that. She had long black hair which fell to her elbows, one of which was propped up on the ground behind her, used to brace her fall. She wore a buttoned-up tan lady's trench coat, and you could see the lining of a black skirt from underneath it. Her legs were covered with dark tights, and her shoes were simple purple flats. From the looks of it, she also had on makeup. Wait, was I checking her out? I shook my head to refocus, setting down my backpack and offering a hand in her direction. And on this part, we actually have the illustration. Are you hurt? Let me help you up. The girl's eyes widened, and she didn't say a word, darting her gaze to my outstretched hand. She sat there for a moment before bringing a hand out and taking my own. As I helped her to her feet, I noticed how tall she was. She wasn't taller than me, but she was definitely taller than Kikamura. Actually, that wasn't saying much. Kikamura was pretty short. Once the girl was right side up, she brought one hand up to her chest, holding her bag tight against her, while her other hand wiped dirt off of her behind. I hope I hadn't stained anything of hers. Are you okay? I asked, a little concerned that she hadn't replied to me at all yet. At the question, she jumped a little and immediately stopped what she was doing to look my way. Her eyes looked intensely into mine, almost looking a bit fearful. Geez, did I upset her that much? Listen, I'm sorry about that. You're going inside, right? I work here. Let me buy you a tea or something, I offered. I felt really bad. I didn't want to just up and leave after pushing her over like that. Not to mention, if she was all prettied up, maybe she had a date or something to go to? Ah, crap. If she had a date, then I probably shouldn't have offered to get her tea then. No. Her lips finally parted, and a low female tone came from them. She looked to me and then to the ground before sliding beside me and into the cafe without another word. What? I spun around in the direction of the cafe door, watching the girl slump as she stood, quickly being seated and taken away from my sight, for not looking back my way at all. What was that? Did I end up upsetting her that much, or she's just really frazzled by the whole thing? The situation left me dumbfounded, and I ended up standing in the way of other customers trying to make it inside because of it. I scooped up my bag and took a few steps away from the door to clear the way, and to try to clear my thoughts. Did I say something wrong? Part of me wanted to go in after her to make sure she was okay, but the other part of me figured she was probably fine. The woman didn't really look hurt per se, but when I helped her up, she looked really scared. Did I look scary? I suddenly worried that maybe I had been making a weird facial expression or something. I'd never seen anyone react that way to me before, so it was a little upsetting to say the least. Perhaps I had something on my face from baking earlier. Trying to put the thought aside, I decided to head home. I made a mental note to be more careful next time. No more running out the door like a maniac. Chapter 5. Break. I looked at my calendar and noticed how far into the year it was already. It was December and exams were right around the corner. Then shortly after that was winter break. I had a feeling Kikamura would probably try and rope me into some sort of activity during it, but I was unsure if I'd be able to ask for the time off. Renaka had already mentioned doing something together too. Maybe I could kill two birds with one stone and go out with both of them together if I had the time. If I did that, I would have had more time to myself for the rest of the break. Whatever would or wouldn't happen would be figured out later, though. Right then, I had to buckle down to study to make sure I got good grades that semester. If I did well, my parents would let me do whatever I wanted without any argument. Pulling out my science book, I opened up where I had last bookmarked and began reading. Alas, it was on something boring once again. Maybe I'm just not much of a science guy, but that stuff seriously doesn't interest me in the slightest. I took down some notes as I read, noting the long, confusing words that were used every other page. There was no way I'd memorize all of the words, but writing them down with the definitions ensured I'd have a better chance anyway. Once I was done, I moved on to a paper that was due. Once again, it was on a topic that disinterested me. But I had to do what I had to do. I won't bother explaining what else I worked on since it really wasn't all that interesting. Just note that I did not enjoy it, and by the time I was done, I was ready to curl up and do nothing for the rest of the evening. But with dinner time arising, that wasn't an option. It was pretty cold that day, and even in the house, so I grabbed my cardigan that I had hanging off the back of my chair and put it on. The plan was to warm up the house with some cooking, so I walked downstairs and proceeded to wrap an apron around my waist. I started with preparing some dough for biscuits after turning on the oven. Once I had those set to bake, I started to make fixings for chicken curry. I cut up vegetables and potatoes as the chicken cooked, and while in the middle of the boiling process, Reedna came downstairs, the smell of the biscuits seeming to pique his interest. I'm gonna get a little closer to the microphone. I think that's better. There we go. E. Kishka? His voice rang in the kitchen as he entered. He was still wearing his school uniform and held a book in his hand. He'd taken up reading for leisure and was particularly a fan of fantasy settings. By the look of the galaxy-dusted cover, the one in his arms was one within the genre as well. "Hey, Reedna," I greeted him in return, turning away from the stove to walk over to him. I reached out my hand and ruffled his messy hair, his golden-orange locks shining against the kitchen lights. "What are you up to?" Reedna lifted up his book, fingers between the pages. It looked like he was about halfway through.
"I really like this book. Do you want to read it after me?"
He lowered the book back down to his waist, wrapping his other hand around the book, but still keeping his fingers between the pages. He must not have a bookmark. Sure. It had been a while since I read anything for fun. I didn't mind reading. It was a nice escape from reality. It was also interesting to experience something new that you might not have been able to otherwise. Reading the same book would also give Reedna and me something new to talk about too, so that was nice. "Let me know when you're done reading it and I'll borrow it from you." Reedna brightened up at my response, face beaming. Shortly after that, he wrinkled up his nose, making a strange face.
"What's for dinner anyway? Something smells funny."
Oh no, the chicken. By the smell of it, it was burning. I must have set the heat on a little too high. Spinning around the back to the stove, I yanked the pan off the burner and eyed my mistake. Yep, they were definitely burnt. Only one side of the chicken pieces were burnt, but it was enough to affect the flavor, so I had to clean the pan and start over. What a shame. Reedna caught sight of my frown and immediately ran to my side.
"What's wrong?"
He pouted, concern painted across his face. It wasn't often that I expressed concern around Reedna. It wasn't that I wished to shield him from negative emotions. I just preferred not to make him worry on my behalf. To be honest, if anyone else were around us during that time, they probably wouldn't have been able to tell I was disappointed in the first place. The way I expressed emotions on my face was usually pretty dull, and the only one who was good at picking up my true emotions was Reedna. To anyone else, me being bummed didn't look that different from my usual expression. I heard people use the term resting bitch face before, and I'd say mine was similar to that, but a bit different. Resting dead face, maybe? Either way, the fact that Reedna could tell the difference just went to show how long we had spent time around one another. "I burnt the chicken," I told him with a small sigh. I dumped the chicken into the nearby trash can and turned back to the sink to begin washing the pan. But it's okay. It won't take long to make some more. Reedna followed after me, his eyes shining to mine. His expression softened, and he grinned a little.
"Oh, okay. You didn't hurt yourself, did you?"
The concern in his voice was charming. He was actually worried about me. What a silly kid. I stopped washing the pan and turned back to face my red-headed brother. I smiled back at him ever so slightly, putting a hand on my hip. "You know that I'm the older one, right? Shouldn't I be the one worried about you and how you haven't even changed out of your school uniform yet?" Reedna instantly looked down at himself, realizing that my words were true. He looked a little embarrassed, planting his book tightly against his torso, as if that would help conceal his clothing. I'm fine. Nothing is bleeding or bruised. I just made a mistake is all, I explained. I turned back towards the sink and finished cleaning the pan and set it back onto the stove after drying it.
Okay,
Rena mumbled, squirming in his spot before suddenly raising his voice.
I'm gonna go change.
And with that, he spun around and headed back upstairs. He's the cutest. Exam prep had begun. It was a constant topic in all of my classes, and teachers and students alike, most especially since we'd be having a break right after they were over. Obviously, everyone was looking forward to the break, myself included. But there was still a tense aura in the classroom when it came to actually taking them. It was a lot of pressure. I wasn't too worried about it, but knew I had to put forth some effort if I wanted to please my parents. Despite everything I disliked about them, I still kind of looked up to them and wanted them to be proud of me. It felt like it became harder and harder to do as time went on, but I still tried. However, there seemed to be one person who was always satisfied with just about anything. And that, of course, was Puduki Kikamura, who had joined me for lunch yet again that day. Holding her desk up, the girl plopped down in her seat and smiled at me.
Good afternoon,
she said in her usual tone, blonde hair draping over her shoulders. My eyes became fixated on it for a moment. I always noticed her interesting hairstyle, but never really went into detail about it. In fact, I never really mentioned much about her appearance at all, huh? As I mentioned, her hair was a bright blonde color, and even though most people who maintained the color always had roots showing over time, it didn't seem to be the case for her. Perhaps she went to a stylist often, or maybe her blonde was natural. What wasn't natural was the way it was styled, though. Her bangs in the front were short, just barely covering her eyebrows, while her side bangs were long and layered. Smaller hairs stuck out and touched her cheeks every now and again, and the rest of her hair was long enough to drape over her shoulders by an inch or two. It was also layered, different parts sticking out in different ways. It always looked a little messy, but not necessarily in an unkempt way. The girl was also short and petite in just about any way possible, too. By then, Kikamura had noticed my stare and looked around with a puzzled expression.
What you looking at?
She asked, her eyes meeting with mine again. My eyes drifted away and focused on pulling out my lunch instead. Maybe I could ask about her hair color. It might be a good topic starter and would skip over all the small talk. Where do you get your blonde hair from? I glanced up at her, before looking back to my lunch. Opening the container, I let my eyes rest on what I'd made that morning. Rice, fish, and a side of roasted tomatoes. I also brought some tea with me instead of water. I bought a pretty good thermos the other day so that my tea would still be hot by lunchtime. It was really handy.
Box die.
Kikamura's face twisted into a really goofy expression, raising her shoulders and putting her hands up in a shrugging position. Somehow, I get the feeling she isn't being serious. I only blinked in response. The girl didn't hold up the facade for long, laughing at herself and relaxing her posture once more as she also opened up her lunch.
Nah, it's natural. I get it from my dad. He's European.
The news kind of startled me. I never would have figured that. She looked pretty Japanese in her features. Maybe she was only half European? So, your mom is Japanese? I asked. Kikamura knows Japanese so well. I figured she might have been raised within the country. I wondered if she ever left to visit Europe.
Yep. I also kept my mom's last name since we wanted to stay in Japan. Her and my dad didn't want to make it hard for people to pronounce something foreign.
Kikamura grinned. It was an interesting circumstance, but one that did not seem out of the ordinary when it came to her. She defied expectations of a normal person. That was for sure. I see, I responded as I took a sip from my thermos. Ah yes, still warm.
Oh, but they gave me an English middle name. Want to hear it?
She continued, not paying any mind to her food at that point. The topic on hand seemed to interest her more, so much so that she didn't stop bouncing in her seat while talking. Sure. It really settled in that I didn't know anything about the girl, which kind of felt fair since she didn't really know much about me. But I was kind of interested. She was unlike anyone I had ever met before, and I was curious to know why. Also, there was nothing better to do than to get to know the girl anyway. Might as well.
Ellie!
She spoke the name in a foreign accent at first, giggling at herself before saying it once again, but this time in her regular Japanese accent.
Ellie, doesn't it sound cute?
Her smile stretched wide over her lips, and her eyes sought for approval. I might as well humor her. Yeah, it's nice. It suits you. I was truthful in my response. It was a playful-sounding name, and considering how playful Kikamura was, it fit her well. The blonde smiled more, her eyes curving under her raised cheeks.
Thanks, Emoji.
She was quick to start shoveling food in her mouth right after she got my response, attention seeming to shift completely. Now I was actually curious. I wouldn't have thought that she would have been anything other than Japanese before. While race wasn't a huge deal to me or anything, it interested me that I didn't pick up on that sort of thing earlier. I wondered what else I didn't know about her. Probably a lot.
Oh yeah,
The girl spoke in between bites of her food, attention shifting back to me.
that cafe you work at is amazing. Everyone was so nice, and the food was so good.
Hikamura's eyes sought for mine.
Were you the one who made the sweets I ate?
I felt a weird rush of embarrassment accompany me yet again. It was so weird to have Kikamura be involved in that part of my life. The baking part, that is. No one I knew had visited the cafe aside from one time I brought my brother in. But it was quite a while ago, and even then, he hadn't gushed as much as the blonde had. Who knows, it was kind of busy that day. I lied. I knew darn well that I was the only one there that day in the bakery, but I didn't want her to know that. I didn't want her to know that while I was making all those orders, I was constantly wondering which one of the ones I made was hers. I especially didn't want her to know that I watched her eating it too. It was too embarrassing. Horribly embarrassing.
Oh, yeah, it was. I was surprised with how quickly it filled up.
Kikamura nodded and crossed her arms, grinning.
Well, either way, everything I had was super duper good. My compliments to the chef.
I couldn't help but grin a little, her goofiness starting to get the best of me. Just how silly could a person be? Thanks, I'll let everyone else know that you really enjoyed it there. I nodded back, my usual expression resting on my lips once more.
Oh, you don't have to go through that trouble.
She lowly raised a hand and waved me off before settling it back on her set of chopsticks.
I'll come again soon and brag to the waitress for you.
Huh? She was going to come again? I mean, I knew she liked it there, but what reason would she have to keep coming? Maybe it was a kind gesture and not literal. You don't have to do that. With the exams around the corner, you should probably focus on your studies instead of sweets, I deflected. But I was soon scolded in return.
Since the guy who works at the cafe.
She grinned at me mischievously, pointing her chopsticks in my direction.
You should be the one focusing on studies instead of sweets. Come on, even your dad.
Kikamura stopped mid-sentence when she realized she'd hit a nerve. My expression had changed from a relaxed one to a tenser one. I felt my eyebrows lower and my jaw clench. Ugh. Why did she have to bring him up? The downside to having the girl more involved in my life bore its head, and I found myself feeling betrayed by her words. She saw how awkward it was at my house. I thought she would have known better than to bring it up again. Apparently the girl required more time to understand things.
I'm sorry, Emoji.
The girl's voice got quiet, her tone a lot less perky. It was obvious she realized she had done something wrong. I was thankful that she was not that oblivious. I let out a quiet sigh and looked up to her to help ease her nerves. Despite how I felt, avoiding eye contact would probably make things more awkward. It's okay. I took another drink from my thermos and glanced at the clock in the classroom. Lunch was almost over. I looked back down to my unfinished meal. I need to finish my food. Anyway, you don't have to worry about me. With the holidays coming up, it's going to be extra busy at work, which means I'll need to do well in the exams if I want to be allowed to keep working, I explained, trying to ease the tension. I didn't think it worked that well because of my flat tone, though. Oh well. Kikamura nodded slowly at me, eating at her lunch and sipping from her juice box. It was quiet for a few seconds, Kikamura slowly changing her expression to a happier one as time passed.
Oh yeah,
she spoke up again, changing the topic.
Are you going to have any free time between working during the break?
I know where this was going. I expected it from her after all. She probably wanted to make plans. The two of us, though mostly just her, had been talking at school for a little while, and aside from her bringing me my homework, we had yet to hang out somewhere besides school. I knew it was only a matter of time before she'd try and plan something. Maybe. What did you have in mind? Give her a bone, Kishka. I wasn't sure if I wanted to spend my free time around her or not yet, but I was trying my best to at least be nice and not shut her out immediately. The blonde perked up at my answer, acting as if she'd just told her she'd won a free puppy.
Well, I was thinking...
Kikamura quickly finished the rest of her juice and closed up her lunchbox. I assumed in preparation for the lunch period to end.
We could go somewhere together. Maybe go shopping or to go eat some yummy food?
I thought we were just friends. The words spilled from my lips, then being half serious and half joking. I didn't think Kikamura would be the kind to just nonchalantly ask me out on a date, most especially since it was uncommon for girls to do so anyway. But this is Kikamura we were talking about, so just in case, I figured I'd throw a comment in there. Instantly, her face turned a few shades darker, and she looked lost for words for a moment. I had to try not to grin.
What? No, we aren't just friends. What do you mean?
She shrieked. I frowned. I don't think that I could have said that. I don't think that she could have said that any louder. Jeez. I regretted saying what I did. The whole class probably heard her shriek. She patted at me and balled her small hands into fists, seemingly in embarrassment.
I just want to hang out during the break. If you don't want to, you could just say so.
Uh-oh. The situation turned on me. Now I was the one in the awkward position. The blonde pouted a little, which made me feel badly. Great. Now I had to do a little bit of cleanup. I'm gonna drink some water. I was just joking, I replied flatly. Anyway, I'm not completely sure if I can get to the time off work, but I'll ask. What I said was also kind of a lie. I knew my boss would absolutely give me some time off if I asked, since I'd done it before and it hadn't been a problem, even during the busy seasons. But I didn't want to give off the impression that I would drop everything just to hang out with her. I wasn't desperate, and I didn't need her to have fun. But to be honest, she wasn't the worst company. It might have been nice to have her around when we didn't have school to worry about. Kikamura looked relieved at my words, letting out a thankful sigh. Her expression soon turned to her usual one, a smile set upon her features.
Geez, Mochi, you're really funny. Maybe not in a ha-ha kind of way, but you know how to take people off guard,
she commented. I wasn't sure if it was a compliment or not, but I took it regardless. After school was over, Kikamura approached me at the school's gate, obvious that she had been waiting for me to leave. She hadn't done so before, so I wondered what was up. Hey, I decided to start the conversation. The weather actually wasn't too bad that day. There was a chance for snowfall later, but it was surprisingly warm out, all things considered. I wasn't warm enough to go without my winter attire, but enough to where it was comfortable to walk home.
Hey, Mochi!
Her catchphrase played from her lips. She always greeted me the same way every time.
So I forgot to mention before, but I was also inviting another friend to join us. Is that okay?
I guess this was turning into an official thing then. I was planning on inviting Rinaka to whatever we were going to do anyway, so I guess it worked out. I did wonder who it was that she had invited, though. I hadn't really seen Kikamura converse with anyone else in class. Maybe there was someone she was friends with before we started talking. I had to admit, ever since the two of us had begun conversing, I found myself looking in the blonde's direction during class. Mostly out of curiosity. Every time I saw her, she was by herself or playing on her phone, though. I wondered if she had any other friends. If not, it would explain why she found me so interesting. After all, she didn't have anyone else better to talk to. That'd end up setting the bar pretty low for myself. Maybe I should stop thinking so pessimistically. I don't see why not. It's not like it's a date, after all. I decided to tease her some more, another pout appearing on her lips when I did.
You say that too loud, people are gonna start talking about us like that.
She looked away from me that time, staring ahead at the other students leaving and passing by the gate. Damn, she was right. Never mind then. Sorry. Apology was mostly to myself, since I didn't imagine she was too frazzled by gossip. I, on the other hand, as I said before, would much rather not exist to some people versus being under a spotlight.
Anyway,
the girl took a step forward, heading in the opposite direction of my brother's school. There is an illustration for this page, so I'm going to go ahead and bring it up. There we go. Wait, I called after her. I have to pick up Reedna from school. If the conversation is short, we can just stand here and talk. I figured she had to get home soon if she was eager to start walking. But since she'd waited for me, maybe not then.
Oh, okay. It won't take long.
The blonde smiled and nodded, hands raising from her sides to her hips as she turned back to face me.
Our class representative is going to be joining us.
That's kind of random. Why them of all people? I didn't even know who our class president was. I really didn't keep up with stuff like that. Oh, was all I said in response. I wasn't sure how else I should have responded. The girl picked up on my lack of knowledge, making an amused face when I didn't say much.
You don't even know who our class rep is, do you?
Her tone was a bit teasing. You could tell that she was happy that she could get back at me for all the times I'd teased her that day. I opened my mouth to say something, but quickly realized I didn't have anything to say at all, so I shut it. This is when a flurry of giggles erupted from the girl's lips. She shook her head before quieting down.
Are you sure you're going to do well on the exams when you don't even know who our class rep is?
The girl shrugged and continued on.
Anyway, her name is Tadona Hirose. She's a short girl in class with really long brown hair.
I blinked. Nope, still didn't ring a bell.
But yeah, she'll be coming to hang out too. We were thinking December 20th. Would that be a good day for you, do you think?
Already setting a date, huh? It was 5 days before Christmas, so while it would be busy at work, it probably wouldn't be as bad until it got closer to the holiday. I guess I'd make it work. I'll ask my boss about it, I told her, readjusting my backpack. The girl looked pleased at my response and did a little bounce.
Okay, do you want to trade numbers?
Her suggestion came as a surprise to me, though it probably shouldn't have, considering her outgoing nature. But by the look of her expression, even that was pushing it for her. Kikamura clearly looked embarrassed, avoiding eye contact and fidgeting more than usual. Well, blue-haired guy already had my number. I don't think her having mine could be any worse. Okay, I replied, pulling my phone out of my pants' pocket, pulling up my new contact screen, and handing it over to her. Kikamura looked both surprised and delighted and quickly pulled out her own phone and copied my action. After we both programmed each other's phone numbers into our phones, we swapped them back and I departed towards Reedness School. I know it's close to the holidays and all, but do you think I could get December 20th off? I asked my boss as I changed into my uniform in the back of the cafe. I figured I'd get my request out of the way first, so I didn't have to worry about it later. Also, I was already kind of looking forward to the day for some reason. There was, however, one thing that bugged me about the outing. What did friends do when they went out somewhere? In movies, they usually just talked and gossiped, but I wasn't the gossipy kind. If that's all it ended up being, I'd probably just want to leave. It was frustrating being left in the dark about stuff like that, but I guess I only had myself to blame for not having any friends. Shouldn't be a problem. Just write it down on my calendar in the office so I won't forget, my boss said with a smile, not a moment's hesitation. Well, that was easy. Okay, thanks, boss, I said with a small bow before I tied my apron in the back and adjusted my collar. Guess I could go ahead and text Kikamura. Who knew that it all would have worked out so easily? Pulling out my phone, I noticed I had a missed call from my school. Did I leave something there again? I squinted at it for a moment before shrugging it off and pulling up Kikamura's number. I'd find out tomorrow if it was anything important. I can do December 20th. I sent the text. I then went to put my phone in my pocket so I could clock in for my shift. But before I could even turn off my phone screen, my phone buzzed in my hand, alerting me of a new text. Jeez, that was fast.
Yay!
With multiple exclamation points.
This is going to be great!
4 happy faces and a cat face emoji. Obnoxious even over text. Why was I even surprised? I shook my head with a small grin and put my phone away. My workday begun as usual, and before I knew it, time slipped on by and it was time to go home. There was a steady flow. Oh yeah, let me take off the picture actually. It's the next day. Sorry, let me find my place again. There was a steady flow the entire day, so it ended up putting me in good spirits. Several of the holiday-themed items that I'd made were selling pretty well too. So far, the cupcakes were the most popular. I took pride in that. I was most confident in those out of all my ideas, and they were also the most fun to make. The situation was a win-win. But despite how great I felt emotionally, I was physically exhausted. I had to get home, eat something, and then study. However, despite all my efforts, once I'd gotten home and ate food, leftover beef stew, I ended up falling asleep at my desk. Not sure how much studying I actually got done, but I could at least say that I was trying. Whatever. I don't work for the next 2 days, so I'll be able to get caught up on everything. There was no use stressing over something that couldn't be helped. Exams were the very next day, and even though several of my classmates were rambling about how worried they were, I didn't really feel that bad about it. I spent the last few nights studying, and even took up studying in class when I had the chance. Kikamura had mentioned her nervousness with one of our classes, but the rest said she felt pretty she said she felt pretty confident in it. Most likely, everyone in our class would do fine. Then the next semester would be the last for us before university. Ugh, university. Now that made me feel nervous. I still hadn't made a decision on what I'd end up doing there. I wanted to make my parents happy, but I considered using that money I saved to pursue baking instead. Couldn't imagine what my parents would do if I did, though. Would they kick me out? Maybe not. But things would certainly get more stressful at home since they'd be disappointed. Maybe I would live in a dorm, but then I'd leave Reedna all by himself. All of my choices seemed like bad ones, no matter how I looked at it. Luckily, I was pulled out of my thoughts with my phone buzzing in the rhythmic fashion in my pocket. Digging it out, I looked at the screen and saw Runaka was calling me. Ah, that's right. I'd texted him about hanging out with the others earlier that day. It was a few hours ago, so I figured he was at work or something when I originally messaged him. But did he really have to call me instead of text me back? I rolled my eyes and pressed a button on my phone to accept the call. I wasn't a big fan of talking on the phone. It wasn't because of anxiety or whatever. I was just pretty soft-spoken, so it was usually hard for other people to hear me on their end. It was annoying, and I wasn't a big fan of raising my own voice either. Hello? I answered, moving my free hand back to thread it through my hair. I was sitting in my bedroom, wearing remnants of my school uniform. I got home a few hours prior and was just sitting around thinking. Probably not the best use of my time, but whatever. I was on the phone now, so you could argue and say that that was a little more productive. Kind of. Hey, Kishka! Runaka's loud voice boomed through the phone speaker, making me flinch and pull it a few inches away from my ear in response. Ow. Hey, I said in response, brow furrowing in irritation. I got your text! I'd hope that's why he was calling me. Sorry I didn't respond back sooner. The man's chuckles trailed off as I didn't say anything in reply for the moment. What was so funny? I didn't understand why he was laughing all the time. It's okay. I figured you were at work or something, I replied. Yeah, long day, but that's off topic. About December 20th, right? Yeah, I replied. Yeah, I could totally do that. You said something about other people, right? Renaka inquired. More specifically, the exact text I sent said, "Are you free on December 20th? We can hang out if you don't mind a few people joining us as well." It was straightforward and to the point. I was kind of hoping that he would have made the conversation quick since I didn't make anything too vague. I guess I was wrong. I cleared my throat before speaking up again. Yeah, my friend... I guess we really were friends at that point, huh? Putopi Kikamura is planning the get-together. She's bringing a friend as well. Is that okay? I asked, even though I didn't really care if it wasn't okay. That was when we were doing things, and if he was too busy or didn't want anyone else there, then tough luck. He was talking to the awkward baker around the holiday season. He couldn't expect too much. Oh, sweet! That sounds like a lot of fun! I love meeting new people, too. Clearly. The man laughed heartily over the phone once more, and then continued to speak. Alright, I'm down. Do we have a meeting spot or a plan for what all we're going to be doing, or are we just going to hang out at her place? I don't actually know that yet. She spoke about doing some shopping or something, so maybe something relating to the holiday? It felt weird to be the one telling him all those things, even though I didn't really know what we were doing at all. Maybe I should have found that out first. Regardless, the man didn't seem to mind in the slightest. That's fine, just text me when you find out more info and I'll be there, he replied back. Easy enough. Oh man, I can't wait to hang out with you all. It'll be interesting to see a non-stressed out version of you. I couldn't help but frown. At the same time, I couldn't exactly blame him either. From his eyes, the opportunity to see me without weird circumstances was probably a treat. Yeah, it should be fun. I sat up from my bed and looked down at my feet. I had to admit, it really did sound like fun, even if nothing was planned yet. Just the thought of going out with a few people and doing something entertaining sounded nice. I wouldn't have agreed to it with just anyone, though. The only reason I felt excited about it with them was probably because of all their persistence in talking to me and being around me in general. I would not have gone out of my way to speak to them or get to know them, but they did that to me, and I couldn't deny that it felt nice. It felt nice to feel wanted, even though it was still strange and uncomfortable to suddenly have new people in my life. I didn't hate it, though. I smiled at the thought, spacing out a little. Anyway, my night shift starts here soon, so I gotta head out. It was nice talking to you. I'll see you soon. Renaka spoke through the other end, bringing my attention back to the phone conversation. The conversation started to feel a bit awkward, so it was reassuring to know it was just about to end. All right, see you later. I nodded to myself and hung up the call. I'm gonna drink some more water. Oh, sorry for the loud noises, guys. There we go. Exams. For the next 2 days, our classes only consisted of taking our exams. It made the school day shorter, but not by a whole lot. As expected, the exams weren't even as hard as everyone made them out to be. I even finished a few of mine before anyone else, and was able to do my ritual of staring out the window until class was over. That's not to say I didn't look Kikamura's way every once in a while, though. She didn't look too stressed while taking them either, so I knew we'd all be in a good mood for when we went out on the 20th. Our meetup was only a few days away, and as it got closer and closer, I felt myself grow more excited and more nervous. I couldn't remember the last time I did something social like that, so it made me worried I'd mess something up somehow. But I probably should have been more concerned that the people I was going to be around were going to mess something up instead. They weren't the most organized set of people. Regardless, it would probably be fine, and even if it wasn't, oh well. I could say it was something I did and move on from that. Kikamura still hadn't told me what we were doing and where, but after the final exams that day, she said she'd probably have something. I'd hoped so. The day came to a close, and the whole school's vibe seemed to lighten since all was left was cleaning up the classrooms, and then after that, we were officially on break. My job that day was to clean the windows and blackboard in our classroom, so I went about that like usual, while my other classmates cleaned off desks, doors, and scrubbed the floor. Kikamura volunteered to help so we could chat a bit, so she was also helping me clean the windows. It meant less work for me and that I'd get to go home sooner, which was a huge plus. "Hey, Emoji!" She greeted me, picking up a cleaning rag and spraying some liquid on the window in front of her. "Hey," and I greeted, glancing her way before focusing on my task. I knew she was going to do most of the talking, so I didn't try and start up any new topic. "So here's the plan." She put on a mischievous-sounding voice at first, before stopping and giggling to herself. She sure thinks she's pretty funny. "So I was thinking we could meet up in Shinjuku and then grab some lunch together? I know of a few great places, so if anyone is picky, I'm sure one of the places I'm thinking of would be good." I nodded in response, finishing up with a window and moving on to the next. Kikamura followed suit and worked on a window to my right. "So then after that, I was thinking we could go and hit up an arcade or something, and then just do some general shopping around. The lights hung around Shinjuku are super pretty around this time of the year, and since it'll be a bit dark by the time we head home, we can see them light up as we walk. How does that sound?" Kikamura's plan seemed solid enough. Eat food, hang out, shop, and then go home. I had no complaints, other than it meant a lot of walking. But considering how much I walked every day, it wouldn't be an issue. "Sounds fine to me," I said in my usual tone, finishing a few more windows and then moving onto the blackboard. Kikamura pouted a little and walked after me, leaving one of the windows dirty. "You don't sound very excited. Are you sure this will be fun for you?" she questioned, which kind of surprised me. I figured the outing was more so for her than it was for me, but the fact that she wanted me to have fun made me feel nice. I don't have any questions about it. I'm looking forward to it, really. I spoke honestly, turning to look at the energetic girl. I wasn't like her. You couldn't look at me and confidently tell. He's having fun. Most of the time. Nor could you look at me and tell he's bored. Because most of the time I was emoting in the exact same way. I had a few problems in the past interacting with others because of it. That is just how I was. Either people got used to it or they didn't. Being judged based on my expression was a little annoying. I wish I could have just given a big smile whenever I was thankful, or at least held a smile as my default expression. But it wasn't that easy. It had never been easy for me. I didn't know why. Even though Kikamura didn't look convinced, she accepted the answer and smiled with a nod, her hair shaking a bit as she did.
Okay,
She replied, grabbing the cleaning supplies, and joined my side to clean the backboard. After a few moments of silence, the girl spoke up once again, speaking softly.
I'm really glad we're friends, Emochi.
I almost didn't catch her words at first, but upon hearing them, I felt a little bad. She was so enthusiastic about everything, including our friendship, and yet I was over there feeling rather empty about it. If we were no longer friends the next day, for any reason, I would have probably gotten over it within a week. I never once desired to be close to the girl. I just kind of went with the flow and did what I wanted. It felt like I was lying to her the whole time. I could write her misunderstandings off as being naive and not understanding me properly, but I couldn't ignore all the chances that I had to push her away and instead let her stay. It's not like I really wanted her to stay. I just put up with it. Listen, I don't hate her, or even dislike her. I just didn't care one way or another. I wish I could have said it out loud without it sounding bad. One part of me wanted to shut myself away and avoid Kikamura completely, while another side of me was interested in what she and Runaka had to offer. The situation was difficult, and I felt as if I only made things more difficult as time went on. But honestly, I think one of the reasons why I was looking forward to hanging out so much was because it might have given me answers. If I had a good time with everyone, then maybe that sort of interaction was worth it. And if it wasn't, I'd stick to my gut and go back to what I'd always did before. I wasn't leaning towards either conclusions, since both of them had their ups and downs, but I was excited to see what would happen in the end. It'll probably be fine, no matter what. Yeah, was what I decided to say in response to the girl. Kikamura seemed satisfied with that, and we both continued cleaning in silence.
Emochi, do we have any more cheesecakes in the back?
One of the waitresses called back to me from the floor. We'd been selling quite a few cheesecakes, especially the holiday exclusive ones. Those particular cheesecakes were made with a ganache center and had bits of tiny chocolate and peanut butter chips sprinkled among the top. It was a really heavy treat, but a really good one. I could see why they were so popular. I looked into one of the big freezers in the back corner of the bakery, which held our back stock. Unfortunately, we must have run out before our morning bakery crew had time to replenish, which meant we were sold out. I walked back up to the front of the room and shook my head to my coworker. No, we're all out, I told her with a slight shrug. Hopefully the customer had something else in mind that they could get. The waitress frowned and looking a bit stressed. Or maybe not.
Damn, this lady is straight focused on this cheesecake business. Do we have any other products you could recommend for me?
Her voice was fleeting, her hands placed together in a praying motion. I guess she was dealing with a difficult customer. I had to think. If the lady wanted something rich and creamy like cheesecake, then I'd have to try and suggest something else rich and creamy. One of the things we'd brought in for the holiday season was a chocolate truffle cake. So even though it was new and a bit different, maybe it would have fit what the woman was looking for instead. Suggest her the chocolate truffle cake, I told the waitress. She nodded slowly and then left out onto the floor to continue conversing with the picky customer. I felt a little bad that I couldn't help more, but if we didn't have something in stock, there wasn't much to be done. That particular cheesecake took a bit of time to make, so it wasn't like I could bake it from scratch right that moment like I did with most of the other small sweets we served. I got back to work on preparing some dough and other small treat toppings for the next morning's bakery crew as I waited for more orders to come in. A few moments later, however, the waitress came back again, this time entering the bakery back room. She looked just as frazzled as she had earlier, looking around until she saw me.
Emochi, listen, can you come talk to this lady?
She said with a sad tone, her hands nervously kneading the palm of the other. Huh? Me? Talk to a customer of hers? That seems awfully strange and unnecessary. Why? I narrowed my eyes in confusion, trying to understand why she would need me to speak with a customer. I didn't really have good customer service. I didn't talk to people often, especially not some stranger who I was supposed to speak formally with. I would rather not.
She's upset with me because we don't have any of that cheesecake and refuses to accept your recommendation. I figured if you went out there to talk to her yourself, since, you help make these things, maybe you'd get her to calm down and choose something else.
By the sound of the situation, things were getting pretty complicated. If I refused to speak to her, then we'd likely have to get my boss to come out, and I'd probably get scolded for not handling the situation. That would be annoying. I didn't want to risk it, so even though I really, really didn't want to have to go and talk to this lady, it looked like I had to. With a sigh, I took off my apron and hung it up on the hook by the door. All right, I conceded. The waitress looked overjoyed, knowing me well enough to know that I'd normally say no to something like that. It wasn't my field of skill, but I had to do what I had to do, I guess.
Thank you, Omochi. I'll buy you a bunch of tea after this, I promise.
She beamed, looking extremely thankful. While the reward sounded nice, it didn't make me feel any better. I'd still take it, though. I followed after the waitress, moving onto the floor and towards the register. At the register, we had a clear glass case that contained many of our whole cakes and other large bakery sweets for sale. In front of the case is where the customers stood to pay for their bills in order to go items. In front of it, right then, was assumedly the lady my coworker was referring to. Approaching her, I took in her appearance. She looked a bit older, had short black hair, and wore glasses. She looked fairly average, but had a bit of a scowl on her face. Once I walked up, she looked relaxed. She relaxed her features a little.
This is the bakery chef, Kichika Moshi. He'll be happy to help you out,
the waitress beside me said quickly, before bowing and leaving the two of us to by ourselves, which I did not appreciate in the slightest. Now I had no one to rely on in case things got awkward.
Oh, I'm so glad to see you. Kishka, yes? Tell me you have some of those beautiful cheesecakes hiding back there. I need one for my daughter's birthday tomorrow. She loves it here and kept pointing that one out, so I really needed to surprise her with it, The lady explained her story without leaving me a moment to interject, hands moving around in a flurry as she emoted. It made it a little hard to look her in the eyes when she was throwing her hands around like that, but it kind of worked in my favor since staring at her hands was easier than looking to her eyes. I was a bit intimidated by her. Once she'd finished speaking, I mustered up what little confidence I had at the moment and replied. "What was your name again?" I asked, eyes locking with hers for a moment. "Tataki Sanaku," she replied, smiling. "Excuse me, Sanaku. I'm sorry to say that we're completely sold out of that cheesecake and won't have any made until tomorrow afternoon. Perhaps I can suggest another cake in place of that one? Or if you'd like, I can leave a note for the bakery crew tomorrow so they can make you one that afternoon." I did my best to explain the situation in a formal way, straining to not trip over my words. Unfortunately, my explanation did not please the lady, and her face morphed back into a frown. "I wanted to surprise her with it tomorrow morning. We already have plans for the whole afternoon, so I won't have time to come get it. Please, it won't be the same if I get her something else, knowing her she'll throw a fit if it's not that." I immediately got annoyed at her last statement. If her child was really so bratty that a cake would make her throw a fit, I'd hate to imagine what they were like every day. I sighed internally and tried my best to respond in a professional way. "I'm not really sure how I can help you, Sanaku. May I offer another product instead? If you don't like the recommendation I made of the chocolate truffle cake, I can suggest you something else you might like." My eyes drifted around the room, searching for the waitress that ditched me with her problem customer. "Please, come save me. This sucks." The lady shook her head and proceeded to talk about how badly she needed the specific cheesecake. "Sanaku, the cake takes about 2 hours to make. If not for that, I'd certainly make it here in store for you." I was abruptly cut off by the lady, her eyes lighting up at my words. Oh no. "That's it! Will you make it for me, please? I'll even pay a little extra, please!"
The lady pleaded, her eyes set on a last-minute special order. She did realize that the cafe closed in an hour and a half, right? I stifled a sigh and looked away from her for a moment. "I'm afraid we'll be closed by then, Sanaku. I'm sorry, She cut me off yet again.
"Please, Kichika!"
The lady suddenly started rummaging through her bag, pulling out several thousand yen and thrusting it in my direction. So as to not let the money fall to the ground, I held it against my chest where it was being thrown and looked to her in concern. Was she really this desperate?
I really will pay extra for this. I'll give you my address to have it delivered or whatever you want. I just need this cheesecake.
Wow. She really wanted this cheesecake. All things considered, it wasn't busy that night. The only thing I was planning on doing once I got off work was to go to bed since the hangout was the next day. But if I got extra money, that meant I'd have a little more to spend while I was out with friends too. Let me ask my boss, I told her, holding the money back out to her. The lady looked happy when I said that, and it kind of made me feel better about the situation, even if she was the one making it stressful to begin with. With how desperate she was, she kind of made me feel bad for her too. Sure, she'd made a mistake by waiting too late, but I could help make that girl's birthday great if I made the cheesecake for them. The reward, even if I wasn't going to be there to see it, was worth the trouble when I thought about how much they'd enjoy it. Walking back to my boss's office, I peeked my head in. He was sitting at his computer, likely answering emails like he usually did around that time. He caught a glimpse of me and raised a hand to wave. Yes, Kishka? He spoke up while clearing his throat. His eyes looked away from the screen and then to me. What was the best way to explain this? Can I stay over to work on a custom order for a customer? That would probably be good enough. My boss looked puzzled as expected, and glanced at his computer, again, looking for the time. Kishka, you realize we close in an hour and a half, right? What kind of order is it? My boss asked, leaning back in his chair and raising an eyebrow. I kind of hoped he would have said yes to make it easy for me, but alas, I guess I'd have to explain. Yes, it's a cheesecake order. The customer was giving Hikaru a lot of trouble over the vacancy of a cheesecake that they wanted. The customer offered to pay extra if I would make it for her tonight. My boss looked me over for a moment before replying. Do you want to stay over to make that? It won't count as overtime or anything, but she's offering to pay for more for it. I don't see why you can't have the excess. You really don't mind. As you can see, neither my boss nor I were especially money hungry. It was kind of him to offer the money to me. I don't mind, I said simply. With that, my boss looked at me blankly at first, and then changed expression into a smile. You're a good kid, Kishka. My boss shook his head with his grin. Maybe not everyone would go to those lengths for a customer, but I couldn't take all the credit. It was just as much for me as it was for the customer. Sure, I'd be staying late and likely delivering it, but it also meant that I would spend the next few hours spacing out and relaxing alone while making the cheesecake since the cafe would be closed. Anyway, go ahead. I'll hand out the keys to you before I leave so you can lock up once you're done. Just don't overdo it, okay? I know you have tomorrow off, so I don't want you to waste your time here when you could be home relaxing. Plus, I need you in tip-top performance on Tuesday, so don't let me down. His words were both encouraging, kind, and with a hint of strict expectation. That's my boss for you. I nodded and turned to leave to return to the customer when my boss called my name one last time. Thank you, he called to me, smiling my way. I couldn't help but smile a bit back. You're welcome. I walked back up to the lady, who looked anxious, looking around and pacing as she waited. Once she caught sight of me, she ran over, hands clasped together. So? Her eyes were pleading, looking for the answer she sought for. I was glad to reward her, as frantic as she was. He said it's all right. If we ring you up for the order at the cash register, I'll work on it immediately. I just need your address and a phone number to contact you by. I explained in the simplest terms possible, so as to limit our interaction. I wanted to work on our Kate, not talk with her. Oh, thank you so much, Kishka. You are a lifesaver, she said with a huge smile on her face, taking but a moment to thank me before reaching into her purse and taking out her wallet. I'll pay immediately. Thank you so much. I did a slight bow and nodded my head in response before realizing that it might have come off rude. You're welcome, Sanaku, I told her before looking around for one of the waitresses. I didn't know how to run the register, so that part had to be handled by them. Waving at one of the waitresses, she walked over and helped finalize the lady's transactions, which only left me with the actual creation process. Time to start. Once I got the woman's address and phone number, I got to work on the cheesecake. Luckily, it was pretty slow as the cafe came to a close, so I didn't have to stop what I was doing to make many orders in between hers. Apparently, I'd forgotten how much longer that particular cheesecake took, so I ended up being in the cafe even later than I intended. Everyone in the cafe cleaned up and left at their regular 10:30 p.m. clock out time, while I stayed behind to finish the custom order. It was about 11:45 p.m. when I finished the cheesecake. While waiting for it to set, I cleaned up my area, finished prep work for the next day, and even wiped down some rarely touched surfaces. When it was time to pack up and leave, I set the cheesecake in our company-themed cake box and set that inside a flat carrier box to ensure it wouldn't move around while I walked to its destination. After locking up the cafe, I took my backpack and carrier box and loaded up a navigation on my phone to see exactly where I'd be going. Oh, great. As it turned out, the lady didn't exactly live around the corner. By train, it would have taken 15 minutes, but that particular line was no longer running that late, which meant I had to walk. My aunt told me it would take about an hour. I groaned. In addition to having to walk back home, I had to walk about 2 hours total. Not exactly what I had in mind for that night's plans, but oh well. With a sigh, I began my cold check, hoping it would pass quickly. By the time I got home, it was 2 a.m., and I was exhausted. The upside to the whole trip was that the lady tipped me about 4,000 yen, so I knew I would be set to hang out and do anything that involved money the next day. However, we were supposed to meet up in Shinjuku at 11 a.m., which meant I wasn't getting much sleep that night. This sucks. Whatever. I couldn't spend all night grumbling about it. I had to get ready for bed, if I wanted to get any sleep at all. Changing into pajamas, I brushed my teeth and washed my face. Alright, exam results are probably available. I finished cleaning myself up in the bathroom and figured I would go ahead and check the results before I forgot about it later. After all, having one less thing poking at the back of my mind would help me enjoy the next day more. I typed in my school's website and loaded up the main page on my laptop. Clicking one of the tabs, I was brought to a sign-in page and quickly typed in my credentials. Once the new page loaded, I clicked on one more tab and it brought up an entire list of names and scores. The document listed every single person in our year and their exam result, so it took a little bit of searching to find mine. Luckily, it was organized, so it didn't take all that long. Let's see. Mochi Kishka. Huh? I felt a cold sweat drip down the back of my neck. This had to be a mistake. My hands trembled over the keys to my laptop, and I found myself having difficulty breathing, an overwhelming, anxious feeling consuming my chest. This was completely unacceptable. How did I even do this badly? I thought for sure that I had done a decent job studying all of my subjects, and yet... Amochi Kikamura midterm exam results. Science, F. Japanese, C. Math, F. English, C. Social Studies, F. My whole world felt like it was spinning. There was no way it was true. There had to be some sort of mistake. While I couldn't actually drop out with scores like those, my chances of getting into a university at all were looking bleak like that. Not to mention my parents. My stomach twisted into a knot and I fought back the urge to vomit. My parents were going to kill me. What was I going to do? What was I going to do? My eyes darted around the document, looking to see if maybe I'd mistaken the results for another unfortunate student. But alas, that student had to have been me. I blinked back the tears that were forming on the corners of my eyes and noticed I was hyperventilating. I needed to calm down. I had to calm down. But the overwhelming feeling of dread wouldn't leave me. Everything was falling apart. I made a mistake. Somewhere, somehow, I made the biggest mistake of my life. There was no way my parents would forgive me for it. There was no way they would just let this go without some sort of punishment. Where did I go wrong? I thought I was studying just as much as I had been before. Maybe it was her fault. I met Kikamura and... No, I couldn't even accept me trying to blame it on the girl. She never once stopped me from studying. No one did. So how did this happen? I bit down hard on my lip, trying not to have a complete breakdown. I could feel tears fighting to pour out, but I knew if I let open the floodgates, I wouldn't be able to close them for a long time. I guess that was one downside for me not showing much emotion. Whenever I did cry, it hurt a lot. And I wasn't able to stop for a while. It was really awful. And it was going to happen again, all because of those stupid exams. I sat there motionless in front of my laptop for a while. I slumped in front of it, one hand set on my desk and the other hand gripping my shirt. I practiced some breathing exercises to calm my heart rate and allow me to focus, which I admit was difficult. But I read about it somewhere and thought to try it. It helped. I wasn't sure why I had felt such a scary rush of feelings all at once, but after it was over, it left me feeling absolutely exhausted and at that point, raw and empty. My eyes looked over the words on my computer over and over. No matter how many times I read it, it made no difference. Damn it. By the time I glanced at the time, it was past 3 a.m. I had to sleep. If I was going to get any sleep at all, it had to be then. Lying in bed, I curled up and stared at the plain wall beside me, trying to think of something to make everything better. Maybe I could just not tell my parents. I was usually a good student. If I strived to get A's on everything without letting my parents know about anything, then by the time final exams came around in a few months, maybe it wouldn't be a problem, right? Maybe. Maybe not. My stomach churned at the thought of my parents finding out. I couldn't tell them. There was no way. I have to figure something out. With all my fretting and worrying, I didn't catch a wink of sleep that night. The sun rose, my alarm went off, and I was forced to live in the reality I made for myself, for better or for worse. Chapter 6. Cracking. I looked like death, or at least like death had visited me the night before and only drained me of half my life. Without any sleep, I hopped in the shower and tried to wake my body up. I was meeting up with Runaka, Kikamura, and class rep a few hours from then. So I was trying to look decent at the very least, even if I didn't feel very good. After taking a towel to my hair, I let it dry like usual and put on one of my black turtlenecks with a red vest over top of it. The rest of my look consisted of black slacks, dark red socks, and my usual black loafers. I guess this was good enough. Thankfully, I woke up late, so I didn't see my parents, I didn't know what I would have done if I'd seen them, honestly. I had no intention of telling them about my exam results, but with how uneasy and anxious I felt, I wasn't sure I would have been able to keep it together if they asked. Even though I got up later than usual, I was up early enough to make breakfast for my brother before he arose, so I just did that. Since he was also on the school break, he slept in even later, so it gave me extra time. I popped some rice in the rice cooker, started boiling an egg, and fried up some sausage. Despite the nice smells of all the food in the kitchen, something didn't feel quite right. Things felt numb. Not really in a physical way, kind of way, though, aside from my chest. My body parts all felt fine to a degree, but... Kishka! My little brother's voice rang from outside the kitchen. His shining face looked to mine as he walked closer, but I couldn't bear to smile back for some reason. I looked his way and waved, looking back to the sausage to flip it over. He climbed into a seat at the counter, and I could feel his gaze on me. Breakfast is almost done, I told him, turning back to the cabinets to pull a clean dish out. I grabbed a nice white glass one, piling some rice on it and setting it on the granite countertop in front of my brother. Next, I cracked open the boiled egg and set it on the plate, and slid the sausage on his dish as well. And there. Reedna sat there for a little bit, not saying anything, even after I'd set his plate. I didn't look back at him and started to clean up after myself, pouring out the water that was remaining in the pot that was remaining in the pot on the stove. Kishka, my brother spoke up timidly. I felt my body tense immediately. Are you okay? Reedna's words rang, hitting me way harder than I thought they would. An overwhelming sensation of wanting to cry came over me. I quickly gulped it down and turned back away. What on earth? The heavy pulsing feeling coming from my chest had been growing all morning, and it made everything feel so much more difficult. What's gotten into you, Kishka? Pull it together. I couldn't bear to break down in front of my little brother like that, especially without a good reason. I furrowed my brow at myself, glaring at the ground and taking a deep breath in before turning to Reedna. I'm fine, was all I said in reply, avoiding his gaze and turning back to the dishes. Come on, Kishka. You're about to go out with friends. You have to push through whatever this feeling is and get over it. I took another deep breath and let it out slowly. Come on, come on. Anyway, I'm going out with some friends today, so you'll be the only one home, okay? I told Reedna as I dried the dishes and put them away. I caught his gaze and forced a small smile onto my lips since it looked like I hadn't convinced him with my words. Come on, I need you to eat so I know you'll be okay by yourself. I also needed him to stop looking at me with such pity. It kind of stung. Okay. Reedna looked puzzled at first, but eventually decided to eat his food. Thank goodness. I didn't usually go out much. Sometimes I'd go into the city to get different kinds of food, but it wasn't usually for leisure. To go to a place such as Shinjuku, with friends no less, was a strange feeling. It was even stranger that day, however. The numb feeling followed after me. No matter what I did or why, it felt like there was something heavy in my chest, just sitting on everything. It was a strange feeling, and not one I was familiar with. I didn't know how to explain it, really. I hoped it cleared up soon. Kikamura instructed us all to meet up just outside of the train station at 11 a.m. I arrived 15 minutes early, so I decided to just stand there at our meeting spot and lean against the building as I waited. I really hoped Kikamura arrived before the class rep. I didn't even know who she was or what she looked like, so it'd be awkward if she came up to me and started talking to me as if we knew each other. My eyes looked around the area, squinting a little at the sun that decided to peek out from behind the clouds that day. It was actually a pretty comfortable temperature that day, but since I'd forgotten to check the weather before leaving, I had worn a scarf loosely around my neck. I also brought my gloves, but pocketed them when I realized I didn't need them. Emoji! A voice sounded from my right. The familiar blonde girl walked down the sidewalk just a few feet away as she waved to me. Ah. As she approached, so did a girl beside her who had long brown hair and was just a few inches taller than Kikamura. That must have been the class representative. Hello, Emoji, the girl spoke. Her voice was a bit deeper and smoother than Kikamura's, and she spoke slower as well. Based off that alone, she even seemed more mature. The two girls were all dressed for the occasion, each wearing a winter-themed outfit. It was interesting. Kikamura wore a light pink dress coat that poofed out at the bottom. Her legs were dressed in white tights with matching fuzzy pink boots that went up halfway her calf. The other girl wore a light blue outfit with a light blue beret on top of her head. Her top consisted of an oversized sweater, and her bottoms were a short white skirt. She looked to be wearing knee-highs and some sort of blue sneakers as well. I was surprised she wasn't cold. My name is Tadone Hirose. I'm our class's representative, but I don't think we've ever spoke. It's nice to meet you. With that, the girl bowed. Ah, so formal. Nice to meet you, Hirose, I spoke in reply, with my usual flat expression. I bowed as well and looked back to Kikamura. She had on a huge grin, as per usual. She was clearly excited. Yay! She beamed, looking around several times before pouting and looking my way. We're still waiting on one more, right? I nodded in response. She was right. Runaka would arrive any minute, hopefully. I sent him all the details over text, so we shouldn't have been able to lose them. And as if on cue, another booming and excitable voice could be heard coming out of the station. Ichika! His voice sang loud and clear, and his blue hair shone brightly under the sun. Looking at my phone's clock, it turned out he was exactly on time. But when I considered his personality, it would not have surprised me if he had been late. Actually, I was surprised everyone was on time. Looking to Runaka, I noted his clothing choice too. He wore a dark green jacket with what looked like a tank top underneath. Figures. He also wore some plain jeans and regular-looking sneakers. Nothing too fancy. Hey, it's nice to meet you guys. I'm Runaka Takashi. He started off introductions first, turning to the ladies. Call me Runaka, though. The man had a big grin on his face, as usual, and looked like the definition of confidence. Both girls smiled in return. I'm Putafi Kikamura, but you can call me Ropey. The blonde grinned, bowing slightly even though Runaka did nothing of the sort. Next, the class rep spoke up, starting with a bow. My name's Tadona Hirose. It's nice to meet you. Runaka nodded in response. So, we had a hyperactive girl with decent manners, another girl who was very formal and polite, and then a guy who was so informal it almost hurt, but was also pretty hyperactive. What an interesting crew we had. Awesome. A friend of Kichika's is a friend of mine, so I'm sure we'll all get along just fine. Runaka let out a hearty chuckle before turning to me and patting my shoulder, taking me a bit off guard. His random physical touches always came out of nowhere and ended up landing pretty hard. You'd think I would have been used to it by now, though. Right, Kishka? I just blinked in response. Yeah, I decided to answer with, even if I wasn't all that sure if what he said even needed a response. Runaka let his hand slide off of my shoulder, returning it to his side and then quickly to his hip to assume a heroic leg stance. It was then that Kikamura spoke up once again, getting our day started. Okay, since everyone is here, shall we go find somewhere to eat? She beamed, looking to each of us before setting her eyes on me. My eyes drifted downwards, and I didn't reply. Everyone else, however, responded with generic agreeing words, and off we went. It was decided to get ramen since several ramen places were starting to open up at that time. It was kind of heavy for a first meal, but seeing as I only made breakfast for Reedned that morning, I'd have to take it. It was better than eating nothing at all. There was small chatter among everyone as we walked, but I kind of tuned it all out. Instead, I focused on our surroundings and the knot in my stomach as I kept thinking about my exam results. I wonder how Kikamura did on hers. We arrived at a small ramen shop after some time, and we all lined up to make our purchases from a ticket machine that was responsible for handling the payment. Oh my god, what the hell is that noise? Sorry, it's noise from outside. If it starts up again, I will close the window. We arrived at a small ramen shop after some time, and we all lined up to make our purchases from a ticket machine that was responsible for handling the payment. We each took turns punching in what kind of ramen we wanted, and after inserting money and taking our ticket, we all took our seats at a nearby booth. Kikamura and Hitose sat next to each other, while Runaka and I sat across from them. Kikamura was in front of me, which was kind of nice. I really didn't want to be across from a person I didn't know. Especially not then.
So, since we're all here now, why don't we all learn a little bit about each other? The blonde suggested. I've never met Takashi until today, and I know you and Amochi don't really know each other yet.
Kikamura spoke, looking to Hitose with a grin. She nodded in reply and turned to face Runaka and me. Fine by me. Who wants to start? Runaka looked around the table. Well, I'm sure it sounded like a fun game to most people. I wasn't particularly thrilled about it. I wasn't really in the mood to do a bunch of talking about myself. After all, there wasn't much to say.
I'll go,
Kikamura said, shooting her arm up in the air as if a teacher had called on her to answer a fun math question. She drummed her fingers against the table for a moment, looking to each of us.
Well, I already introduced myself to you, so you know my name, but now on to stuff you don't know.
She sure liked to ramble.
I'm 17 years old, a Libra, and I'm half European. My blood type is A, and my dad works overseas, but sometimes ships international food to my house. I'm also an only child.
As she spoke, I was kind of surprised with how much of the information I didn't know already. Actually, I barely knew anything she mentioned. I knew I kept thinking that. The fact that she just laid it all out to a guy she didn't even know made me feel badly. We had been talking for a few weeks, but I never really asked about her at all. Did I? I asked about her hair, but that was it. Damn. I was such a shitty friend. I knew nothing about her and I didn't even try or ask. Why was she so nice to someone like me? The heaviness in my chest only got heavier, and I found myself staring at the table, hands folded under my arms. The others nodded in reply to Kikamura, Hitose speaking up next.
I'm class representative at Takamura High School, class 5A.
The girl stopped to giggle.
But I know everyone here except Takashi should know that already. Anyway, I am an Aquarius and blood type O. I have 2 younger siblings at home, and my favorite hobbies are reading and writing.
Kikamura quickly interjected afterwards.
Oh wait, hobbies! I love coloring books and roller skating!
The girl said excitedly, which only further nailed in the fact that I knew nothing about her. Hitose laughed, and Runaka then leaned forward, assuming his position in line. You guys make me feel old. I haven't been in high school for a few years. But anyway, since you guys are doing the whole zodiac thing, I'm a Gemini. I don't remember my blood type, but I think it's on my ID or something. Runaka shrugged and then grinned. I also work a lot. Mainly a ton of outside work, so don't blush at the tan lines. Runaka laughed. Oh, and I live with my best friend. The only hobbies I can really think of is, working. I love working. Runaka let out another laugh. The other two looked shocked in response to his words.
You like working?
Kikamura questioned. That's the first time I've heard anyone say that. Hitose giggled. What can I say? I just love to move my body and work up a sweat. It's almost addicting. My roommate has to stop me from getting a third job all the time. Runaka said in his usual chipper and loud tone. The three of them continued to speak more about it, but I ended up zoning out. The sleepiness combined with a strange feeling that kept eating away at me, making it hard to focus at all. Suddenly, there was a hand on my arm, which made me jerk my head up, looking in the direction of it. It was Runaka. You okay? It's your turn, Runaka said with a raised eyebrow. Oh, yeah, I was supposed to play along with this. Despite the fact I really didn't want to, I sat up straight and thought of what to say. I had already forgotten half of what they had said at that point, which made it even harder to think of what I had to say. I have a little brother named Reedna. My parents work a lot, and I like to bake, I said simply, keeping it short so I didn't have to talk much. It was about all there was to me, after all. I lifted my head just enough to see Kikamura's dissatisfaction with my answer, though, her bottom lip inching out in a pout.
That's it? Mochi, there's more to you than that.
She insisted. There really wasn't. And it's not like it would have mattered if I said more anyway. That's pretty much it, I replied, looking away and at the table instead. In comparison, I was absolutely boring. But that was okay. That's just how I was. Boring, mediocre, nothing to make a big deal about.
Okay, so a mochi is actually way cooler than that,
Kikamura insisted. Apparently, mine wasn't good enough for her.
So he works at this cafe selling sweets he makes all by himself, and they're awesome too. His little brother is pretty cute. He actually walks his brother to and from school every day and...
Yeah. Thanks, Kikamura. I interrupted her in a cold tone. It's not like I couldn't say those things myself. I was sure it sounded kind of rude, but I really wanted Kikamura to stop. I said what I wanted to say, and there was no need to keep rattling things off. With my sudden interruption, I could feel everyone's eyes on me, and that combined with how I was already feeling, I wanted to go home. Ugh. I wasn't normally like that, but that particular day, I just felt so uneasy and irritable. I could see Kikamura frown out of the corner of my eye, but there wasn't much I felt I could do. Maybe I should have gone home. Before I had another moment to think about it, our ramen was delivered to our table. One by one, we each got our bowls. It looked pretty good. But my appetite wasn't really there. My eyes looked over the contents of the bowl. Noodles, chopped spring onions, a boiled egg cut in half, as well as little slivers of pork on top. I took a big whiff of it, hoping that would make my appetite interested. Unfortunately, that was not the case. I just didn't feel hungry at all. This sucks. Everyone else dug into their food, slurping away. They all looked to be enjoying it. I should at least try some, I guess. Picking up my spoon, I dipped it into the broth and took a small sip from it. Yeah, it was pretty good, but I didn't have the desire to eat it at all. Runaka was the first to take notice to my untouched bowl, slowing down from consuming his. Hey, Kishka, aren't you hungry? You aren't touching your food. When Runaka mentioned it, the other two stopped to look too. I wasn't sure what to say. If I would have been able to explain what I was feeling, then I might have understood why I felt the way I did, but I couldn't decode it. Oh, I had a late breakfast, so I'm still kind of full, I lied. I hadn't eaten anything yet. At that rate, I wasn't sure if I'd be able to eat anything at all.
Why'd you order such a big bowl then? You could have just had a bite of mine if that's all you're hungry for.
Kikamura said, Kikamura said with a grin, shaking her chopsticks at me in a scolding way. I didn't change my expression at all and shrugged. Yeah, I replied. I really didn't want to waste all the food, but I didn't want to eat it either. It felt like I'd only throw it back up. Ugh. Runaka must have sensed my frustration because he put a hand on my shoulder once more, just lightly squeezing it. My eyes looked up to meet him for a moment. He smiled my way, but I couldn't bear to do the same. I dropped my eyes down to my full bowl of ramen and let myself space out until everyone else had finished eating. Once everyone else was done with their ramen, Kikamura brought us all to an arcade. It was full of a bunch of different types of games. Some were classic arcade cabinets, while others were rhythm games. They had also had picture booths and crane games inside the little plaza.
This is my favorite place to go on the weekends, Kikamura told us as we entered.
She pointed to the crane machines and led us all over.
These are a lot of fun too. I spent way too much money on these alone.
Kikamura laughed a little, rubbing the back of her head in embarrassment. The other two chuckled in response, walking up to the variety of crane machines to see what all they had to offer. They had a variety of stuffed animals and plushies, and some even had anime figurines inside.
Ooh, that rabbit is so cute,
Hirose cooed, placing both hands on the plastic casing to the machine. One of her fingers caressed the transparent wall as she stared, showing a rather relaxed version of herself. Runaka quickly stepped up to the plate, hands on his hips as he approached the machine. Then I'm going to win him for you, Runaka said proudly, pulling out his wallet and feeding a few coins into the machine.
Oh, are you sure? I can try it for myself.
the brown-haired girl insisted, frowning. Runaka wasn't having it, though, shaking his head. I said I'm going to win him, so I am going to win him. The blue man puffed out his chest, smirking at us as we crowded around the machine. It was easy to see that pride was a factor in his enthusiasm. The machine was a UFO crane machine, a kind of game where you got to press 2 buttons, once each, in an attempt to knock the item inside off of the platform and into the slot below. I wasn't very good at them, but I also didn't play often, so maybe that had to do with it. Runaka pressed the first button, bringing the crane halfway to the right side, and then released it. Next, he pressed the second button to bring the crane further back in the box. Bringing it close to the item, the crane then scooped both of its mini claws together, tapping the item, but not enough to make a difference. The crane then reset its position. Dang! Shoot! Not fair! The 3 chorused their feelings all at once before Runaka put some more coins into the slot. We're not done trying, don't worry, the man said in a challenging tone, readying himself yet again. He pressed down the first button again, not bringing it over as far this time. Next, he brought the crane back and stopped it when it was just over the corner of the stuffed animal. As he let go, the crane dipped down, opening its arms again. Touching only the cord of the prize, the little UFO scooted it closer to the end of the platform, but not quite enough to make it fall. Another chorus, this one of groans, came from the 3, followed by the sound of Runaka filling the machine with more coins. I just stood there and watched, having nothing to add to the situation at hand. Runaka switched up things this time, pressing the back button first, then moving onto the button that made the crane go right. He stopped it even shorter this time, catching the side of the plush and thankfully sending it tumbling off of its platform and down into the recovery area. The 3 all yelled out in celebration, Kikamura raising her arms in joy. Leaning down, Runaka grabbed the plush and thrust it at Hirose, a slight squeak of delight coming from her lips. The brown-haired girl wrapped her arms around the plush and proceeded to jump up and down in delight. Kikamura clapped, giggling, while Runaka's chest puffed out in pride. See, I told you I would win it, he said before laughing. Hirose nodded, squeezing the plush in her arms. Thank you so much, Takashi. That was so kind of you. She beamed. Kikamura nodded and jumped up and down. Yeah, that was awesome, Takashi. Kikamura said energetically. Runaka only laughed in response, waving them off with his hand. Don't mention it, and please, call me, and please, Runaka is fine. No need to be so formal. The man walked past the girls to see what other games were around, and I followed along, behind the group, just basically being a spectator. Next, everyone moved on to some rhythm games, which I wasn't very good at, so I just watched everyone else play that too. After that, we began to walk around the arcade center some more, seeing what else it had to offer. Turning down a hallway, we came to a whole line of different kinds of picture booths called Purikura. It was basically a fancy photo booth with filters and options to decorate the pictures. I'd always seen girls from my class pass around the pictures they got from it, but I never really understood the whole craze. I didn't usually take pictures of myself, so that probably explained my disinterest. We have to do this one, guys, Kikamura said excitedly. I jumped in surprise when she suddenly grabbed my wrist, pulling me inside one of them. All right, then. Either side of the booth was covered with a plastic sheet to keep the inside light out. Once inside, I was practically blinded by the bright front lights that were installed. It was probably for the photo's sake, but geez. I squinted and watched Kikamura hit the button, hit the touchscreen that read off the instructions and gave options for the photos. As she made her selections, Hirose and Runaka entered the photo booth. Hirose didn't look too fazed by the interior, just smiling at me. We made eye contact. Runaka, on the other hand, seemed quite interested, peering around the whole box and staring at the screen that Kikamura was typing away at. I'm gonna drink some of my tea. Interesting. So this is what the inside of these things look like, he said out loud, but mostly as a note to himself. A moment later, Kikamura jumped back and waved everyone closer in. Come on, guys, it's about to start taking pictures! She beamed as she looked around at each of us to make sure we were close enough in. What kind of poses should we do? Runaka asked, raising an eyebrow. I kind of wondered the same. I didn't really know what to do for these sort of things. Kikamura shrugged and smiled. Whatever you want! And with that, a voice played from the machine, alerting us it was about to take a picture. 3, 2, 1, snap. A fake camera sound effect played over the speakers, and the screen that showed us our reflection went dark for a few moments. It showed us a short preview of how the picture turned out, and then immediately began another countdown. One after another, more pictures were taken, and after a matter of seconds, we were done. Next, it alerted us to go to the side of the machine to decorate our pictures. Woohoo! Hikamura cheered, ducking out of the photo area first to begin decorating the images on the side. Everyone followed after her, but I slowly walked behind. The decorating area was small, comfortably fitting the two girls. Runaka squeezed in behind them, holding the privacy curtain up to see the process. I didn't really need to be there for it, so I leaned against another machine beside the one we used, watching different groups of people pass by and enter in one of the other dozen machines. Once the images were printed, Hikamura ran to my side to show me how they turned out. There were about 8 photos total, each spread across a rectangle and put into a sticker size. Folding the stickers in half, Vogue Blonde each gave us our own rectangle for us to keep. I grabbed mine and brought it up close, inspecting them and inspected the images. I looked so dead to the world. My expression in the pictures were flat, and while the others decorated the image with digital stamps and fake blush to make me look happier or silly, even my poses were lacking any sort of energy. Is this how I look all the time? No wonder I didn't have any friends growing up. I wouldn't want to be friends with an expressionless zombie either. I held back the urge to crumple up the sticker and instead placed it inside my wallet, out of sight. Man, that was fun! I almost want to go again! Don't you? Renaka turned to me with a grin, holding up the sticker. He pointed at a particular goofy pose that he had done. Both girls in the picture mid-laugh. Yeah, sure looked like fun. My chest ached at the sight. I was off on the side, not doing anything interesting at all in that picture. It would not have mattered if I was there or not. Yeah, I said flatly in response, before turning around and walking down the hallway. This was hard. Why was today so hard? I was going to have fun with everyone, but it just felt like it would have been better if I hadn't come at all. I felt sick. I entered the main game area, not paying any attention to my surroundings. I blocked it all out. I had left everyone back at the Purikuda booths, but I didn't really care. I couldn't bear to be there right then. It was too much. I felt like I was on the brink of breaking down all over again. Why? Why couldn't I hold it together and enjoy myself? Was I really so broken of a person that I couldn't just pretend to be normal for once? The urge to cry started to rise in my throat, and I struggled to swallow it down. Damn it. My stride was brought to a stop when I felt a hand grab my arm, a pretty firm one at that. Looking back at the one responsible, I came to see it was Runaka. He looked upset. Not that I could blame him. I wasn't making anything fun. And so this page has a photo associated with it, or an illustration. Let me bring it up. Here we go. Hey. He paused at first. I didn't say anything back, holding my default expression as the burning sensation inside ate away at me. Just tell me to leave or something. Just say it already. I know everyone is probably thinking it. Are you okay? His words took me by surprise. At the sound of them, I felt my chest ache again, and I struggled to keep my expression stable. Damn it, damn it, damn it. I looked away as quickly as I could, not wanting him to see me in case I really did start to cry. My lip quivered. I took a silent breath in and then out in an attempt to calm myself. I'm fine, I breathed out in a shaky tone, staring at the ground in front of me as he continued to hold my arm. I'm fine, so leave me alone. I'm fine, I'm fine. You don't seem fine, Runaka sighed, slowly letting go of my arm and taking a step closer. The ache inside my chest only seemed to grow the more he spoke to me. Ugh, I don't want to do this. I want to go home and be alone. I'm not cut out for this. I'm not cut out for people, or for school, or for anything. What's wrong? You can talk to me about it, if you want. If it's about the others, I won't tell them. It's not like I even go to school with them, so your secrets are safe with me. Stop being so nice to me. I've been nothing but mean to you. I've only ever acted inconvenienced by you, except when it's benefited me. Why would you act so kind towards someone so selfish? I felt my jaw quiver, and I bit down on my bottom lip as the desire to cry started to consume me. I wanted to run away, but I couldn't. I couldn't move from my spot at all. I felt frozen. I couldn't say anything. I knew if I did, the tears wouldn't be able to stop.
Runaka, Mochi, what's up?
I heard Kikamura's voice behind me. Startled, I tensed up and didn't move. Runaka was quiet for a moment before answering her. Oh, nothing. It was just cramped in there. Wanted some fresh air. Runaka said it as an excuse. You didn't have to cover for me. You really didn't have to.
Oh, yeah. It can be. Well, if you guys want to go play some other games, we could do that. Or we could go shopping if you want.
The girl offered a few new ideas, sounding perky as usual. Deep breaths, Kishka. Deep breaths. I had to get over this. I couldn't just break down crying in public. I had to get a hold of myself and move on with the day. With one more silent deep breath, I buried my feelings further underneath the heaviness in my chest and turned to face the group. Hidase was standing beside Kikamura, smiling and looking at everyone else with a huge stuffed animal in her arms still. Well, Kishka, want to do some shopping around? Runaka asked me now, eyes staring into mine as his expression softened. I bit the inside of my lip a little before answering, my eyes looking back down before I forced them to look at Kikamura. Sure, I spoke simply. It was getting a little darker out, so the light that were hung all over Shinjuku had twinkled on, illuminating the city in some seasonal flair. It looked nice, and Kikamura was sure to let others know she thought so too.
Ooh, so pretty!
She beamed as we walked through the downtown area. It was a bit colder now, so each of us had on a pair of gloves, except for Runaka, who claimed he didn't need any. We were now hitting up local shops for some Christmas presents.
Kishka, did you buy everything you needed for your family?
Kikamura asked, window shopping as we walked. Occasionally, she'd slow down to get a better look at something, and then speed back up to normal walking speed again. Yeah, I responded. I bought Reed a nice set of bookmarks and a new book that he'd expressed interest in a few months prior. For my parents, I generally got them the same thing every year. I gave them a gift card to a nice restaurant for the two of them, and a gift certificate to their favorite uniform and business supply store. They were never much for material items unless it helped them at work, so I did my best to satisfy those desires, as well as give them some time to themselves.
Aw, that's no fun. Well, maybe something will stand out to you and you'll get them a little extra something.
The blonde beamed at her idea before turning to Runaka.
What about you?
I only buy stuff for my roommate, but I haven't gotten her much yet, so this is a good opportunity for me. Runaka grinned.
Yeah, I still have to get some things for my siblings.
Hidase nodded, tightening her hat on her head as a gust of wind flew by.
Awesome! May the shopping begin then!
Kikamura laughed and ran swiftly down the street, giggling all the way. I felt envious of her mood. I wished I were that happy all the time. We started our shopping adventure by going into some smaller shops, looking at handmade items and unique clothing. None of it really interested me, but Hidase took interest in a lot of it. I mostly hung back and pretended to be interested in trinkets by the door. Once we were done with that, we moved on to some bigger stores that had larger varieties. Some stationery shops, some clothing stores, and a few that specialized in holiday items specifically. Runaka picked up a few things from there, and Kikamura had shown interest in a few items as well.
Mochi, what do you think about this?
She asked me as she picked up a neutral-colored notebook. It came with a fancy-looking pen and was made of leather. Probably something someone like Hidase would like. Seems fine, I answered, not sure how else to respond. Those sort of things didn't interest me.
What about this?
Kikamura held up a fancy-looking apron that was double-lined with an extra pocket at the top.
I was talking to my dad about doing some more cooking lately, and he suggested we start cooking together when he visits, so I thought I could buy us matching aprons.
It looks okay, I replied. Again, I wasn't sure what to say. I wasn't really the kind of person that she should have been asking. Maybe she was hoping that since it was related to my interests that I'd have more of an opinion. Unfortunately, she was asking too boring of a person for that. Kikamura didn't look too pleased with the answer and only nodded, walking it off. It felt like the day was dragging. Nothing was fun. I was getting tired and I wasn't contributing to anything the group was doing at all. I just didn't have any motivation to. I tried to hide the looming sadness and numbness as best as I could so I didn't have another close call with Runaka. But as time dragged on, it got harder and harder to ignore. It felt like I was playing Jenga with myself. Our last stop was a department store, and we agreed to split up, which made me feel a lot better. Time alone sounded really nice. I decided to go to the men's clothing department, and I boredly shifted through the different kinds of clothes on the racks. I wasn't actually interested in buying anything, but it gave me something to look at to pass the time. As I looked, my mind wandered. I wonder what would happen if I just left right now. The group agreed to leave after we were done at that store anyway, so I could have snuck out the front door and just gone home. No one would have known until it didn't matter anymore. The longer I stood there and thought about it, the more I considered it. What was I even doing there? I knew I wasn't as social and interactive as everyone else. So what did I expect to happen? That I would get together with all these people and magically be fixed to know how to talk and have friends? Yeah, right. I was an idiot for even saying yes to coming along. The aching in my chest made itself known once more, and I started to feel sick. I audibly sighed and took my hands out from between the clothing racks. No one would miss me if I left. Not for a moment. Ugh. My chest pulsed, and I glared down at the clothing racks in front of me while my vision started to blur, feeling tears rush to my eyes. Why did I feel so sad? Maybe it was because I wanted to be missed. I wanted to feel like I was worth something. But I wasn't. I wasn't, and there was nothing I could do about it. I felt my shoulders shake as tears started to pour from my eyes and down my cheeks. Not here. I didn't want to do this here. Ugh. I struggled to keep my sobbing quiet, looking around for a public bathroom to shut myself into. In between my tears, I ran down the hallways, keeping my head low, hoping no one would notice my state. I eventually came to a bathroom and ran inside, locking myself in a stall. I let my back hit the wall and I slid down to the dirty floor, letting the tears run down my face as I cried in agony. Nothing was hurting on the outside, but my chest ached like never before inside. Somehow crying seemed like the only solution at that point. I set my arms on my knees and stuffed my face into my arms to muffle my sobbing as best as I could. It hurt. So bad. The thoughts from earlier circled in my head over and over again, and the pain in my chest didn't cease or fade at all. All I wished is that I would have disappeared. I don't know how long I was there, just crying like that. It was a while. All I know is that by the time I had stopped, my face was hot and sensitive to the touch, and my sleeves were wet. That, and I felt completely numb, like nothing was even happening around me, like nothing even mattered. I didn't even hurt. I sat there for a few more minutes, just listening to the sound of my breathing and spacing out while staring at my knees. Soon afterwards, I heard a call over the intercom alerting customers that the store was closing soon. I guess that meant I had to leave. I pulled my phone out of my pocket to look at the time and noticed I had a missed call and text from Kikamura. I stared blankly at my phone and swiped across the screen to read the message. "Where did you go? Are you okay?" Sad face with a tear. I decided to text back. I wasn't feeling very good, so I went home. Sorry. There, so be it. If she was mad at me, I wouldn't even blame her. Standing up from the bathroom stall, I decided it was time to leave. I held onto the wall as I rose, my steps wobbly and uncertain. I guess my body was just as exhausted as my mental state. I walked out of the bathroom and then right out the front door, not looking around me at all as I left. When I went outside, it was snowing. What a sad day for snow. I used my scarf to cover up my ears and mouth, put back on my gloves, and headed towards the station. By the time I got home, everyone was already in their rooms, and takeout remnants were scattered around the kitchen. I probably should eat something, but I honestly didn't feel hungry at all. Whatever. I turned my back to the kitchen and headed upstairs and collapsed on my bed. Everything was numb. Nothing felt like reality. It just felt like I had cried myself into another dimension where nothing existed, not even emotions, which was saying a lot for me. It's not that I didn't have emotions, I just didn't know how to express them. Was this my fault then? It was probably my fault. With that, I passed out on my bed, leaving everything behind for the day, for better or for worse. The next day I woke up with a pulsing headache, one that caused me pain just by moving. It might have been from not eating anything at all the other day, or maybe it was from all my crying. Who's to say which it was? Either way, it made getting up a struggle. Even though I was suffering with that, I felt a lot better already in comparison to the day before. The heaviness in my chest had dispersed, and while I still felt anxious whenever I thought about my parents finding out about the news, I still felt better overall. Lugging myself off of my bed, I hopped in the shower and took some pain medication. The steam and the medicine seemed to help a bit, so by the time I got out, I felt a little better. That day, I had to call my school and ensure that the results from the exam really reflected the truth. There could have been some sort of mix-up. So I had to settle that once and for all before I set myself into another frenzied episode. Picking up my phone, I was initially shocked to see that it was already 1 in the afternoon, but additionally surprised to see I had a few texts I missed while I had been sleeping. Swiping across the screen, I brought up my text conversation with Kikamura. "Where did you go? Are you okay?" Sad face with tear. I wasn't feeling very good, so I went home. Sorry. "I'm sorry you weren't feeling okay." 2 exclamation points and a frowny. "I thought something was wrong, but I didn't want to make you feel uncomfortable, so I didn't say anything. I hope you feel better soon, okay?" Exclamation point, question mark, tongue face. "Text me if you want to talk." Heart. "If you don't want to, that's okay too. Have a good Christmas." I stared at the text for a little while. Even though I didn't feel nearly as bad as I did that day, I still got a similar thought, wondering why this girl cared as much as she did. Maybe she was in it for a selfish reason too. Or maybe she just really liked me. Either way, I wasn't sure how to respond, so I left it as it was. As of right then, I didn't want to be around anyone. Being by myself for the time being sounded better than anything else. I opened up my next text conversation, which was from Runaka. I was a little worried that he was going to yell at me, but at the same time, I knew I would have deserved that after ditching them all. "I hope you're okay. Don't hurt alone, okay? Shit sucks, but you don't have to deal with it by yourself. Call me sometime." Ugh. I felt my lips tense, guilt gracing my conscience now. I made them worry. I didn't make it any better by accidentally missing Kikamura's call last night in the store either. I felt like I should at least apologize. My hand hovered over the mobile keyboard for a moment before I pulled my hand back. If I responded back, even if I just apologized, Runaka was going to ask more questions. I didn't want to talk about it at all right then. I just wanted to forget it happened, so I didn't respond back. Instead, I did as I was originally planning to do and called my school. Even though it was already break, I figured someone might be in anyway. Occasionally they had teachers work throughout the break. However, I forgot it was only a few days before Christmas. No one picked up. Ugh. The only thing I could have tried was to email my principal and hope she'd see it soon. Sigh. This was not at all how I wanted the situation to end, but there was nothing I could do about it for the time being. Just sit and wait. I looked at the time on my phone again and shrugged. My parents wouldn't be home for several hours, so I decided I would make some food and try and clean up a little to get my mind off things. The more I thought about everything, the worse I felt, so I figured it would be best if I just distracted myself. For now, that is, until after I got my email back and solidified the information. After all, if I really did that bad on my exams, it must have meant I wasn't doing that well in my classes to begin with. If that was the case, I thought my teachers would have talked to me about it at school or after class or something. Shaking my head and trying to get rid of my thoughts, I went into the kitchen and saw that the mess from last night's dinner was still out. Guess I'll start with this then. I threw away all the garbage and took care of the recycling, fishing out and cleaning any utensils that were sitting inside the takeout containers. After that was done, I opened the refrigerator and pulled out some pork belly that I'd purchased over the weekend. I wanted to cook it so that I could slice it up over top some noodles. After not being able to touch my ramen the day before, I was craving noodles hardcore. I started by popping the noodles in a pot of water, boiling it by itself. Just the smell from that alone was great. Next, I set it to boil again, but with a series of spices and ingredients to add the flavor. Once that was done cooking, I transferred the pot to the oven and set a timer for a few hours, which would ensure the meat would be soft, tender, and fall apart in my mouth. Since I did all I could at the time, I took out a small container of pudding and sat down at the counter. I hadn't heard anything from Reed in his room all day. I wondered if he went to a friend's house again. If he did, I would have thought that my mother and father would have told me. I shrugged and decided I'd check his room just in case, after I finished my snack. As I slowly ate away at the pudding, the front door unlocked and opened. Oh, I guess he's back already? Who I thought was Reedna actually turned out to be my father. Huh. He was early. I glanced at the clock in the kitchen and furrowed my brow at it. It was way too early for him to be home already. "Welcome home," I called out to him, watching as he removed his shoes and set down his bag. Before he said anything in response, I saw my mother follow right after him, her entering the house and removing her shoes as well. Huh? Both of them are home this early? The knot in my stomach was suddenly way more apparent, and I had trouble gulping down my last bite of pudding. In fact, I lost all taste in my mouth entirely. My heart started to race. "Is everything okay?" I asked. Maybe Reedna had some last-minute school thing that they happened to get off work for. Or maybe it was time for their holiday break too. Or maybe... My panicked thoughts spiraled. I was terrified. I don't know, Kishka. Is everything okay? My father asked in a condescending tone, looking my way, practically glaring. Oh no. The anxious feeling hit harder than I thought it would, and I found myself already struggling to not hyperventilate. I squeezed my hand into a fist under the table and focused on my breathing as I watched my mother also look my way with a displeased look in her eyes. Oh no. Come sit at the table, Kishka, my mother instructed, pointing to the dinner table. My father had already set himself there, arms crossed as he stared my way. I bit down on my lower lip and looked away. I guess this was the only food I was going to be able to eat that day. I already felt way too sick to even consider eating more later. I threw away the other half of my pudding cup and sat at the table where both of my parents were now settled. It was hard to not shut up my internal panic, fear pumping through my veins. I was so scared. Terrified, I didn't want to do this. I had no idea how bad the conversation would go, but one thing was sure. They knew about my exams, and I was about to get in a lot of trouble. The air was tense as we sat at the table together. No one said anything for a little while until a sigh erupted from my father's mouth. Quit that stupid job of yours, Kishka. Once the words came from his lips, my fist instinctually slammed against the table. No, I yelled out. It wasn't even on purpose. It just kind of happened. The panic immediately set in, and I stood up shaking, my eyes darting from both my mother and father. Don't do this, please. I'll make it up somehow. I don't know. I just don't... The urge to cry hit me yet again, my voice cracking. Kishka, we don't have a choice, my father spoke up, shaking his head and sighing. We were willing to allow it given the fact that we were keeping up with your grades and earning some of your own money. It was a good experience, but now... My mother sighed as well, my father taking up where she left off again. This has gone on for too long. You have prioritized something that will take you nowhere, and you are putting your entire future at risk for a childish game. My father began to raise his voice, me flinching in response. It wasn't often when he yelled like that. It was honestly terrifying, and I felt my eyes moisten again. We even let you do your own baking here, but clearly that was a misjudgment on our part. My mother's words stung, the disappointment in her face clear as day. We're sorry we led you to believe that this was an all-right decision for your life. It's not, Kishka. Failing your exams means limiting your options for universities and careers, and that's going to hurt you, Kishka. At this rate, becoming a doctor is out of the plan, which is incredibly disappointing. You had so much potential, but with scores like that, no one will think anything of you. Do you know how much this affects you? My father continued to belittle me. I couldn't even hold their gaze anymore, glaring at the dinner table in front of me. You are quitting that job, and we're signing you up for a cram school. I refuse to let my son be an embarrassment. I couldn't take it anymore. You keep making fun of it, I mumbled at first. My hands shook as all the frustration, embarrassment, and anger rose up inside me while I interrupted my father. This wasn't fair. This wasn't my fault. I tried hard to do well. I just wanted to take care of my family, make them proud, and do something I loved. Tears dripped down my face and onto the table below. You don't understand me at all. All you care about is money. I want to bake. I don't care how much money I make. Why can't you just let me be happy? My voice shook as I raised my voice a little, both because I was currently crying and also because I wasn't used to speaking so loudly. We don't understand you? We can't let you be happy? My mother repeated my words back to me, her raising up out of her seat. Look at me, Kishka. I reluctantly looked up at my mother, whose eyes were full of anger. I flinched. We work constantly to make sure you all have whatever it is you want. If you want to bake, then quit that job of yours and bake here if that makes you happy. But I won't sit here and be told that we aren't doing what's right for you and Reedna. Her sharp words and loud voice made me wince, but the tears didn't stop. How can you understand us? You never see us. Have you ever spent more than a couple of hours with your other son? He considers me more of a parent than you two. How can I feel appreciative when I feel like all we are is a burden to your life? Slap. The sharp pain and impact came to my being as my mother slapped me right across the face, causing me to stumble back in surprise. I don't think my mother had ever laid a hand on me like that before. I was shocked. I stared below me for a moment, processing what had happened. Only the sound of my mother's panting words from across the table to be heard. Don't talk to me like that.
Don't you ever talk to me like that. You're quitting that job and you're going to start taking your life more seriously whether you like it or not.
And with that, my mother stormed up to her bedroom, closing the door right behind her. The kitchen was silent for a moment, my father still sitting at the table. He then sighed and stood up. You may think you're all grown up now, but all you are is a kid. My father's words sounded in the room, strict and cross. You can't just do whatever you want. This week is your last week working at that stupid cafe. No exceptions. My father ended the conversation with that, getting up out of his chair and following after my mother. I stood motionless in the kitchen for a while, tears slowly dripping down my face. Everything was ruined. Chapter 7. Hide and Seek. My parents never came back downstairs from their bedroom that night. I made food and ate it all by myself, the feeling of numbness coming back to me. I even checked my email that night, and all my principal said was that the likelihood of a mix-up that bad was almost impossible. She also said that they had attempted to contact me on several occasions. I had missed a few calls from school before. I guess that explained it. The whole time, I was just failing at everything, and I didn't know it. And then, on top of it all, I had to give up one of the only things that made me feel truly happy. Baking at home wasn't the same. I'd grown to like baking for others so much that now I desired it. I wanted to create. I wanted to make other people smile in the only way I knew how. But it was being ripped away from me. How was I going to explain it to my boss? He depended on me, and now I was going to let him down too. I was letting everyone down. This reality was the worst. I didn't work until the following day, so I at least had some time to think about what I was going to say to my boss. But really, I didn't want to think about it at all. I didn't want to leave the only place I felt truly respected and cared for, where I felt like I belonged. The house my parents paid for didn't feel like that at all, even more so now. I stared at my phone, looking over my most recent texts. What's wrong? You can talk to me about it. Runaka's words played back in my head from the other day. He seemed so genuine, like he wanted to help. But there was no way he could help with something like what I was going through. It was my problem. But then again, he was older than me. He might have some ideas that I hadn't considered. I stared at my phone. Maybe I should. Come inside. Runaka's words came out softly. Oh, that wasn't very soft. I'm going to say that line again. Jesus Christ. Come inside. Runaka's words came out softly, their tone and volume quite different than usual. He gave me a small smile and waved his hand out to the empty couch located in the middle of the room. I ended up deciding to give Runaka a call after all, and luckily, he didn't work that night, so he invited me to come over to his apartment to talk about things. I was kind of desperate, so I didn't let anything keep me from coming over. Not my pride, my insecurities, or anything else. I needed some help. I couldn't do it by myself. If he was offering a helping hand, I was an idiot not to take it, and I was tired of being an idiot. Thanks, I said in response, listening as he shut the door behind me. I sat down on the dark brown couch, sinking into the soft cushions. It was pretty comfy, and I found myself able to relax a tiny bit, just sitting there. Runaka left the room for a moment and came back with some tea, setting a cup down in front of me. I nodded in reply and picked it up. So, what happened? Runaka asked me, presuming to use a more hushed tone when speaking to me in that moment. It was comforting. I appreciated the effort towards me. Even though I was the one to have come all that way, I still felt pretty hesitant to speak up. The day before brought up a lot of insecurities I didn't realize I had until just then, so it opened up a few doors, but not exactly in a good way. I started off by mumbling, looking down at my reflection in my tea. My usual expression sat on my features, but even though I felt pretty nervous being stared at, Runaka waiting for me to speak up, my outward appearance was no different. If I didn't speak up, then my point of coming here was wasted. I had to say something. My parents are pretty strict, I started, Runaka nodding out of the corner of my eye. They aren't around a lot because of work, but expect my brother and me to keep up good grades. I guess that doesn't sound too strict when I say it out loud. I reflected on my words, frowning more. Well, I didn't want Runaka to take my side per se. I started to feel like coming over was a mistake if it turned out I was just overreacting. Anyway, I completely failed my exams. I got several F's and B's. I've never done that bad before, so it was really upsetting, I guess. I wasn't sure upsetting was the word I was feeling the other day, but it was the only one I could think of at the time. Sorry. I was going to keep it from my parents, but I guess they found out anyway, and I realized I was explaining things in a weird order. I didn't even mention the cafe situation yet. Jeez, I was so disorganized. I audibly sighed and hung my head. Talking to people was hard. I wished I could just transfer information directly from my mind to his. Renaka could see my frustration and spoke up, using that soft tone from before. That sounds shitty, man. You usually get good results at school, huh? Can't imagine how you must be feeling to see you did so badly. Renaka responded, taking a sip from his mug. I guess I should drink this before it gets cold. I followed suit, drinking some of my tea, sighing directly afterwards. Don't you know that class rep girl? Do you think she could pull some strings or something? Renaka suggested. I hadn't really considered it, but seeing as I apparently didn't do well on my regular assignments, I found the likelihood pretty low. Thinking back, there was a point in which I didn't even look at my test scores after grading. That was probably where my grades started to take a turn. It was a huge mistake on my part, and I should have known better. I sighed and continued to look down at the mug, hunched over. Probably not. Not in enough time, at least. My thumbs lined the top of the mug, rocking the liquid back and forth. I decided to continue my story. I think Kikamura mentioned this at the ramen place the other day, but I work at a cafe. I like it there. A lot. I felt my expression soften slightly as I spoke about the cafe. Everyone there seems to really like me, and I work really hard every day. And I also enjoy what I do. It hardly feels like work most of the time, so it's really nice. People depend on me, and customers like my food. I explained it, and felt a small smile appear on my lips. Just remembering how it felt to work at the cafe left me feeling warm inside. But my parents told me I have to quit because they think it's affecting my schooling, and also because they never wanted me to start baking there to begin with. I felt my expression change once again, glaring down at the tea. They don't like what I do. They think it's a waste of time. But they've never once asked me what I think of it. If I'm honest, I want to go to school to get better at it. Baking, that is. They are completely against that. They want me to get a job that pays lots of money, like a doctor or something. Runaka nodded at me as I sat up on the couch, holding my tea, close after ranting out what was on my mind. I took a deep breath and reflected over the past couple of days. I changed the topic slightly, remembering that I owed Runaka an apology. That's why I was so... whatever you want to call that, when we all got together and hung out. I breathed in once and then back out. I found out the night before about my exam results, and I guess it was too much for me to handle, so I ended up making a huge mess out of our day. I'm sorry. My eyes drifted down to the mug once again, gripping it harder. I felt guilty about it all. I felt guilty I ruined the hangout we all planned. I felt guilty I was so oblivious to my shortcomings at school, and I felt guilty for rambling to Renaka, a guy I hardly knew, about all my dumb problems. Renaka sighed and got up from his seat. He didn't say anything for a moment, which made me feel nervous. Was he mad? Did he regret inviting me over? The man strode over to me on the couch, sitting down right next to me with his tea in his hand. He was so close now that his knee hit mine as he sat there, looking to me. Even though I felt a bit intimidated having him so close, I broke my eyes away from my mug and looked to him. To my surprise, he had a small smile on his lips. "It's okay, Kishka," he assured me, his left hand touching my shoulder. He gave it a small squeeze and smiled a bit more. "Everyone was worried about you, but don't take that the wrong way, okay? We wanted you to have as much fun as we did, but be honest, we didn't know how." Renaka looked away from me, staring up at the ceiling and raising his right hand, which had his mug in it. "When we couldn't find you, we sat down and talked a little. I don't know you all that well, so I wasn't sure if I was imagining things or not. I asked Kikamura about you. She confirmed that you were indeed acting kind of strange, and she looked pretty worried." Renaka spoke, smiling a little when bringing up Kikamura. "They spoke about me?" I frowned and looked down at my mug. I spent the whole time crying alone in a bathroom, and they were sitting around talking and worrying about me. Ugh. But she also admitted that she wasn't sure how to help you have a good time. I can't blame you for not communicating if you were struggling that day, but you should say something next time if you can. You're around friends and stuff, you know? What's the point of hanging out if you're not going to have a good time? Runaka was right. Kikamura didn't know much about me, but it's not like I ever told her that much about me either. Is that what I called friends? People who knew nothing about me, who I only spoke with on occasion? Somehow, I knew that's not how things should be. Runaka caught my attention again by squeezing my shoulder, and I looked up at him. Talk to me, Kishka. I wasn't lying when I said that stuff before. The blue-haired man continued to smile, sympathy behind his words. We've all lived that lonely life at least once or twice before, and we had no one else but ourselves. I'm not saying that that's how it is for you now, but because I really don't know, but you're certainly acting like it. Runaka's words hit me hard. That lonely life? I felt seeing everyone else, sorry. I never considered myself lonely, but thinking back to how I felt seeing everyone having fun with Runaka and with me barely participating, it did feel lonely. But talking, it was hard. I felt discouraged. I'm not normal, am I? I asked rhetorically. I reflected on my feelings and my viewpoints over the last few months, comparing them to what Runaka said. I wondered if maybe I was an alien. I didn't know how any of that stuff worked. Socializing, talking, what it meant to be a friend. It was completely foreign to me. Runaka frowned, setting down his tea on the coffee table. None of us are normal. We're all different people, and some of us do things differently than the average person. There's nothing wrong with that. Runaka answered my question, but I found his explanation a little hard to relate to. I frowned and looked down at my mug. Well, either way, my parents are making me quit, and there's nothing I can do to stop them. An achy feeling accompanied my words and my thoughts. When I thought about going through everyday life without the cafe being a part of it, it hurt. I don't know what I'll do without it. It's one of the only things that make me feel accepted and happy. I walk in there, and everyone is glad to see me. My boss depends on me, and I can smile openly. I don't usually do that. I don't know why, but that place is my life. Without it, I don't have one. I rambled my thoughts out, not sure if they made sense or not. Maybe I was being dramatic. I didn't know. But I wasn't stretching the truth. The cafe really was the only place where I regularly felt wanted and cared about, but it was being taken away from me. What else could I do? Runaka swung his arm around my back and brought me closer, our sides touching. The physical touch was strange and foreign, but also felt kind of nice in the moment. Then don't leave it, Runaka smiled, as if it were that simple. Hold on to it until your knuckles turn white. If it really makes you that happy, then don't let it go. This is your life, Kishka, Runaka said, passion behind his words. As much as I would have loved to take his advice, I didn't think he understood how impossible that was for me. If it were that easy, I would. But they might kick me out if I don't do as they say, and then I wouldn't be able to go to university at all. Even if I do end up settling for something I don't enjoy for university, I don't think I should throw it away altogether. They were probably right to yell at me about ruining my life by not having a good career in the future. I rambled on, but Runaka interrupted me. What's a good career to you, Kishka? Becoming a doctor or something? I thought you said you didn't want to be that. Runaka let out a sigh and continued. I think that whole good career thing is a little overrated. Who cares if you don't bring home millions every month? I think you should do what makes you happy. I was sure the man's words were supposed to be inspiring, but they weren't doing much of that for me. Life wasn't that simple. If I just did what made me happy, I'd be shamed by my whole family while struggling to make ends meet all my life, right? Look at me, Kishka. Runaka smiled. He used his right thumb to point to himself. I didn't go to university, and I worked 2 to 3 jobs, and I'm happier than I've ever been in my whole life. I'm doing work that I love, and sure, I can struggle sometimes, but what's life without a little hardship? Do what makes you happy, and don't let anyone take that from you. Runaka beamed, determination behind every word. Don't let anyone change you, because if you spend your whole life trying to live up to your parents' expectations, they may be happy with you, but you won't be happy with you. Runaka's rant ended with a laugh. But this is coming from a guy who doesn't even talk to his dad, so maybe I shouldn't compare my situation to yours. I sat there on the couch, mulling over the older man's words. Maybe Runaka had a point. I didn't want to let go of my dream, and if my parents refused to help me in pursuing something that made me happy, well, maybe I didn't need their help. I'd saved up plenty of money by myself and could pay my way through school without a problem. The only thing that would be tricky is bringing my grades back up. Maybe you're right, I finally said, breathing out and lifting up my mug to take a drink. I don't have to listen to them. But even if I didn't, it meant that there would be some complications along the way. My parents and I got into a big fight last night. Oh, Runaka smiled at me, moving his arm that was around me up to ruffle my hair, which was a little weird. But considering how much smaller I was compared to him, maybe it was just a natural response. I didn't really notice until then, but he was quite bulky compared to me. While I was rather skinny and lanky, Runaka had a fairly well-built upper body, and his arms were easily double the size of mine. Maybe he saw me as a younger brother type or something. Fighting's no good. I'd like to help you out in that aspect, but I'm not that good about solving family conflict. All I can really say is talk to them about it and maybe apologize. It's hard to say I'm sorry, especially when you feel like you weren't in the wrong, but it'll get you more respect in the long run. Take my word for it. Runaka winked at me, though his smile seemed to fade a bit. He really has had more experience than me. I headed to work that afternoon after leaving Runaka's apartment, trapped in my own thoughts as I walked. He made good points, which made me feel a little less lost, but at the same time, I still felt like I was going to be fighting an uphill battle. I had very little optimism when it came to convincing my parents, but maybe if I did as Runaka said, it'd go better. At the very least, I made my mother really mad, so I probably needed to apologize to her. Thinking back to my conversation with my parents, I was shocked and disappointed with myself because of how badly I'd reacted. It was the first time I ever raised my voice at them, and the first time I'd ever gotten so emotional in front of them too. It was kind of embarrassing to think I'd let myself fly off the handle like that. But in a way, I guess it really showed me how much baking meant to me. I had to convince my parents that it was important. When I got to work, I shifted my focus on my tasks and immediately got into the zone. I'm actually able to focus. That fact came as a surprise to me, considering all the terrible things that had happened over the past few days. I guess talking with Runaka really helped. I felt glad for it, but also a bit uneasy. The blue-haired man knew so much personal information about me, and I wasn't sure how to feel about it. But he really did make me feel better. A fair trade-off, I suppose. Christmas was only 4 days away, and since we were closed on holiday, it meant we only had 3 more open business days, and it was busy. Really busy. The cafe was packed most hours, and we were selling things out from our cases left and right. In the back, the lead bakery chef and I worked side by side to ensure orders were finished in a timely manner. While it was a little weird to work alongside someone, I got used to it and even sort of enjoyed it. She was good at her job, and she was quick too. I couldn't have asked for a better partner. When the day came to an end, I headed home as per usual and contemplated how I wanted to start the conversation with my parents. It was best if I did it as soon as possible so the situation didn't fester. I messed up. I know I did, so I had to own up to it. When I returned home, I could hear both of my parents upstairs in their room watching the television. Usually, they were asleep by then, but both of their companies were closed for the rest of the week due to the holiday. My parents usually indulged in their freedom during this time and spent most of their time together in their room or out of the house. It seemed this time was no different. Since I had just gotten home from work, I proceeded to take off my shoes and set down my bag, pulling out a cake box. I took home one of the desserts I had designed and baked for the season. If I wanted to help convince my parents, bringing home some evidence that baking was something I was both passionate about and good at was crucial. I walked up the stairs and stood outside their closed bedroom door. The nervous feeling settled in, and I found myself wanting to turn back to my room and forget all about my plan. No, I had to do this. Runaka's words rang through my mind. This was my life. The only way I was going to make sure it remained mine was by doing the responsible thing. I guess. I tried my best at least. Lifting up my right arm, I knocked on the door lightly. A few moments later, I heard the TV get quieter, followed by a few footsteps. My heart raced in my chest as I waited for the door to open. I hoped this went well. The door slowly opened, my mother peering out from it. Once seeing me, she frowned a bit, but opened the door wider. Yes, Kishka? She asked, a bit of irritation laced behind her words. I couldn't help but feel bad, knowing I was the reason behind it. I struggled to hold her gaze, taking a small breath before speaking. I want to talk to you two, I said simply, trying not to bring much attention to the box on my arm. My mother looked at me for a moment before nodding and opening the door the rest of the way. I walked inside their bedroom, which looked a bit different from what I remember it being. The last time I remember seeing their bedroom was when I was young. I always ran in and watched TV with them on their bed. It's been a long time since then. Once inside, I sat down in a chair that was a few feet away from their bed. My father sat back in my bed, while my mother was near the edge of it, closest to me. I was a little nervous, but I couldn't let it get the best of me. They were my parents, and I respected them, even if I didn't like how they did some things. But I had to voice how I felt and make my desires known. I'm sorry. I started the conversation. I stared at my lap and then to both of my parents. I wanted them to know I was serious. I made a lot of mistakes, I admitted, dropping my eyes down to my lap. I wasn't strong enough to continue looking at them as I spoke. It was too intimidating. I didn't mean to slack off on my studies. I honestly thought I was doing a good job, but I started paying less attention to it, and things ended up like this because of me. It hurt to say the words, but none of it was untrue. As much as I wanted the results to be a fluke, there was proof that I messed up, and I couldn't ignore that. In addition to that, I yelled at both of you, and that was not okay. I didn't mean to take my failures out on you. My parents stayed quiet as I spoke, which I was kind of thankful for. It helped me stay on track. But I want you guys to understand something about me. The feeling of vulnerability came over me, and I felt like my breath was getting caught in my throat. Keep going, Kishka. I've been baking for a long time, and when you guys allowed me to take my interest to a job, I fell in love with it. Every aspect of my job, it makes me happy. I forced myself to raise my head, looking to my father. My gaze shook. I know I messed up, and I want to make it better, but please don't take this away from me. I'll do anything to continue doing what I love. It was quiet for a little while after I finished speaking. My father looked away, and my eyes switched over to my mother's. Her eyes weren't looking to mine, though. Please say something. After what felt like a lifetime, my mother finally spoke up. You can't do it forever, Kishka. Her words sounded in my ears. She didn't look all that much more pleased than before, despite my apologies. That sort of job isn't very sustainable, and we want you to be able to support yourself in the future, not struggle. We just want what's best for you, Kishka, my father added in. I took a deep breath and spoke up once again. Keep your cool, Kishka. I think this is what's best for me. I want to make other people happy by bringing my creations to the world. It felt a little awkward to confess my feelings like I was, but if I didn't express how I felt, then they'd never know or understand. I'm good at what I do, and I unraveled the ribbon on top of my cake box that sat in my lap. Opening the box, it revealed 2 large pieces of chocolate truffle cake. I made this. I made the recipe myself and baked it myself. My cafe started carrying this item because they trusted me and knew I had it in me to make something successful. And they weren't wrong to do so. We've sold so many of these. My eyes looked from the cake to back up at my parents. I really love doing this. I'm going to prove to you that I can do this. My mother and father looked at each other, looking unamused. Please, try some. I brought this home so you could try it. I pleaded. I couldn't remember the last time they ate one of my sweets. I just wanted to see them enjoy it, like everyone else. I really, really wanted them to enjoy it. To see the looks on their faces as they eat each bite. I needed it. My parents looked hesitant at first, but after a few moments they gave in. Walking up to me, they picked up forks that sat in the box, and each took a bite from the sweet treat. They chomped down on it, chewing slowly. My mother raised her eyebrows as she consumed it, but my father's expression remained the same. Butterflies danced inside my stomach, and my heart felt like it was fluttering along with them. I was so nervous. My mother nodded and set the fork back down, finishing up her bite. She looked impressed. I won't deny that you have a talent for this. You've grown a lot from when you were a kid making cookies, that's for sure. My mother smiled, reminiscing. That was a good sign. I felt a glimmer of hope. So, I won't ask for you to pay for it, but I've been considering going to school for this, and absolutely not. My father spoke up, setting his fork back down inside the box. He had no change of expression, and only showed his strict side to me once again, not even commenting on the cake. Kishka, I will not allow that. It's one thing to fail your exams, but a whole other thing to purposely throw away your future, all for baking. My father kept speaking about my future this and my future that, and I started to grow frustrated. Renaka's words drifted into my head once more. Is it really throwing my life away if it's the life that I want? I asked, lowering my eyebrows and pressing my lips together. I was feeling nervous to speak up against him again, but I wasn't going to get anywhere if I kept letting him push me around. I won't ask you to pay for anything involving it, but this is my future and I want to spend it baking for as long as I possibly can. That's truly what makes me happy. My father laughed, shaking his head. Life isn't about being happy all the time, Kishka, he said. My mother looked to my father and nodded. You have to make sacrifices sometimes, and happiness isn't always going to come first. What you should be focused on instead is how to maximize your success in life so that you can be happy and secure later. It was my turn to interrupt him. I understand your concern, father, but that's not what I want. I am about to graduate, and I've decided that what I want is to become a pastry chef and do it for as long as I can. I held my ground, my expression tense and crossed. My father glared back. Kishka, you heard your father. We will not allow this, my mother said, crossing her arms and sitting back down on the bed. Even though she seemed impressed with my work, it wasn't enough to turn her against my father. This wasn't fair. And no matter your excuses, you need to think realistically and quit your job and focus on a real career. My father further sealed the deal, his glare never ceasing. You can't suck up to us and throw cake in our faces just to convince us otherwise. This isn't fantasy land. This is reality. You have no say in this. He was so rude. So mean. I did everything I thought to do to make him see things from my side, yet it was always either his way or the highway. I'd be putting up with this shit for years, and yet this was how he treated my proposal? I never asked for much, but the one time I asked for something I cared about, I was shut down without a second thought. I was angry. My hand shook, but I grabbed either side of the cake box, closing it to keep my body settled. I'm not going to quit, I grumbled, shooting a glare back at my father's way. And I'm going to go to school for what I want, and there's nothing you can do about it. I stood up quickly and held the box in my hands. My adrenaline was pumping, and I held my father's gaze as long as I could. I was completely going against everything they told me, and while it was scary, it was also exhilarating. I did have power over my own future. I just wish I didn't have to fight for it. Excuse me? My father looked offended by my words, my mother's expression darkening as well. I pay for your food. And I pay for your bills. If you want to disobey us, then you can get out. What? My father's words shocked me, but I brought my expression back to a glare. If I continued to let him push me around like that, I might have really regretted it. I was almost done with school, and soon my future would be decided. It was now or never. Fine, I spoke back. My eyes looked to his, and then to my mother's, our expression unchanging and crossed with one another. Whatever, let him kick me out. With as much money as I had saved up, I could figure something else out. With that, I spun around and left their bedroom. I could hear my mother murmur something as I left, but I didn't look back. Ugh, that did not go as planned. But honestly, what did I expect? My father was not the type of person to budge over anything, no matter how small. He would fight to his grave over anything, even if it was a matter of 100 yen. He always had to be right. I laid in my bed, stared at my ceiling as I processed the conversation that just took place. If my father was serious, I really would have to move out. That meant leaving Redina and having more responsibilities on my own. It would also mean I'd probably have to work more to make up for the extra bills on top of school. The reality of it all hit me, and I sighed. Is this what I wanted? Is this what I really wanted? Maybe my father was right, and no. I had to stop thinking in such a defeated way. Runako was right. This was my life, and I should live it how I want. I would figure out the details later. I glanced at my phone, which sat on my desk. It was late, but I considered talking to Kikamura. Maybe she could offer some advice. Or maybe I could ask Runaka. He lived on his own, so maybe he could suggest somewhere cheap. Ugh, This was my reality now, it seemed. You can move in with me! Runaka's voice sounded over the phone. I decided to go to bed that night and call Runaka in the morning to help figure out what my next step was, but I didn't expect him to offer me a place to live right off the bat. You don't have to do that, I mumbled, typing away at my laptop for apartments. I was honestly just looking for advice and some tips, but this guy... I know, but this apartment is actually pretty huge, and it'd be nice to take up some empty space with someone new. Plus, it'd make rent cheaper for everyone. Runaka laughed on the other end, me wincing a little at the volume. Geez, was he for real? Okay, well, if I did move in with you, I'm not sure how I'd make it to school. You live further away than my parents' house, so the commute would be pretty long. I should probably find something closer. No way! I have my truck. I can drive you to school whenever I work at the auto shop. It's right across the street, after all. Runaka's voice was friendly and enthusiastic as always. I sighed. You realize we haven't known each other that long, right? I had to verify, making sure he wasn't confusing me with a long-lost brother he'd taken under his wing or something. Runaka only laughed in response. Was he really taking this seriously? What's wrong with this guy? Of course I do, but you're a good guy. At least from what I can tell. Plus, we're friends. Friends help each other out. I'm not sure friends are supposed to give each other a house to live in, though. Isn't that a bit much? I questioned, eyes squinting at him, even though he couldn't see it from across the line. Again, we hadn't known each other that long. I couldn't tell if that blue-haired man was really kind or really naive. Are you kidding? That's exactly what friends do. If your friend needs somewhere to stay and you have the space, why not do it? Come on, Kishka, just accept it already. Runaka was persistent for some reason. I guess it could work. If I could bear living with Runaka, that is. Plus, you'll get to be my best friend. You guys will get along pretty well, I think. Oh, that's right. He had a roommate. Ugh, man, I had to worry about that too. Hopefully Runaka was right and we would all get along, but there was still a chance we wouldn't at all, and... Hey! Runaka broke my silent thought, guarding my attention. Yeah? I pouted, annoyed he'd shouted at me. Don't worry, okay? Depend on me, dude. Easier said than done. Work was busy, as expected. There were only a few more days until Christmas. The lead bakery chef was frantically making a variety of pies that were special ordered, while I handled the orders that were coming off of the floor. Once things calmed down for a moment, I slipped out the door to the main floor and feasted my eyes on the busyness that was our cafe. There were people everywhere. Some foreign people, some regulars, and some people whom I didn't recognize at all. Each of them had some sort of sweet on their plate, eating away and enjoying every bite. I grinned at the sight, folding my arms over one another. I was going to do this for a long time. At least that was the plan. I dreamed that every day I would come in and ache my heart away and watch others leave with a grin on their face. That would be my reality. As I looked over the tables, I noticed a familiar blonde figure in the back. Ah, Hikamura. She seemed preoccupied on her drink, sipping away at a strawberry milkshake. Her eyes looked around the room, drinking from the glass and tapping her fingers on the table. Eventually, she caught sight of me and was apparently surprised, coughing and choking on her milkshake for a moment before regaining her composure. I couldn't help but snicker. The blonde shot her arm up in the air and began waving, a huge grin upon her features. I hadn't talked to her since the time we all went out on the 20th, so I wondered if I should say something to her. Looking around, I didn't see any odors go up in the window, so I decided to approach her. I didn't want things to be weird. Walking across the cafe floor, I approached Kikamura. Her face lit up even brighter when she saw me heading her way. Jeez, wasn't she a little too happy to see me? I really didn't mind. I was just surprised. Hey, I called to her as I approached her table. I towered over her as she sat, almost creating a shadow. I forgot how short she was. I moved a bit to the side to reduce the shadow.
Hey, Mochi!
She beamed, rocking back and forth in her chair.
It's sure booming in here.
She immediately brought up a relevant topic, but since I didn't want to let things lie from the other day, I changed it. I'm sorry about Tuesday, I said immediately. Hikamura's expression changed instantly, clearly surprised to hear my words, but her smile returned, even bigger than before.
Don't worry about it. I'm just glad to see you're back to normal,
she said simply, not asking for an explanation or anything. What I said was good enough for her, apparently. Wow. She really was kind. I smiled a little in response. I don't know what it was, or what changed, but I felt an urge to talk to her. Maybe it was guilt making me feel that way. Either way, it certainly didn't feel like it was coming from a negative place. Perhaps it was Runaka that opened the door to those sort of feelings. I didn't know why. but I suddenly felt a bit freer. Like I could and should just tell Kikamura everything.
Mochi, order up!
One of the waitresses called my way as she walked to pin her ticket up. I had to get back to work. Hey. I opened my mouth to speak up, but Kikamura only smiled, waving me off.
It's okay, Mochi, I won't keep you.
The girl giggled a little, her legs flailing from under the table.
Thanks for coming by to say hi.
I wanted to say something more, but lost the courage to do so, and just nodded at her instead. Yeah, I replied, and with that, I headed back to the kitchen and got to work. To drink some water. After the cafe closed, the lead bakery chef and I left doing the next day's prep, stocking up on some items that were especially popular that year. After finishing up most of the work, I pulled out my phone. I want to text Kikamura. If I was going to end up moving out, then she'd probably want to know, and I kind of wanted to let her know too. I smiled a little bit at my phone for a moment before feeling eyes on me.
What are you smiling at?
Mudaki, the lead bakery chef, teased, pausing her work to look my way. Oh geez, was I making a silly face? I felt a bit embarrassed to be called out like that, so I set my phone away in my pocket. I wasn't trying to smile on purpose. Nothing, I responded. The girl smiled and shook her head.
You got a girlfriend or something? I saw you talking with the girl out on the floor earlier.
She continued to tease me. Was it a crime to be happy? No, she's just a friend, I said simply, turning away and focusing on my last task of the night. Uh-huh, the woman said with a giggle, lingering for a moment before continuing her work. She was just a friend. Plus, she wasn't even really my type. She was small and cute, but wait, did I just call her cute? I felt my face heat up. Damn it. The silly bakery chef made me start thinking weird things all of a sudden. I never once viewed Kikamura as anything other than a friend, but there I was comparing her to those who I would consider dating. If anything, the girl that I slammed into the other day outside the cafe was more my type. Well, maybe minus the awkwardness, but her looks interested me a fair bit. I pouted to myself while I finished prep, but once I was done, we both locked up and headed home. On my walk home, I thought about Kikamura again, but not in that way, just in general. I decided to pull up my phone and text her. This is weird. We should hang out sometime. Let me know when you're free. I sent the text, turning off my phone screen afterwards. Was that too forward? I hope not. I frowned at myself for psychoanalyzing everything I did. It was that stupid Mudaki's fault. My phone buzzed in my pocket and I pulled it back out, seeing out a response from Kikamura.
I'm free tomorrow. What time and where?
Smiley face. I smiled a little at her response, even though I kind of expected her to be free. I knew she had no obligation to make time for me. Anywhere. I have work at 3, so maybe sometime before then is fine by me. I scratched at the back of my neck and wondered where we could get together. I didn't want her to come to my house, not after all that had happened recently, but I didn't want it to stop us from being able to talk at all. I owed her an explanation at the very least.
How about we grab some lunch at 3% Dookie Dookie? I like their takoyaki a lot.
Oh, face. I didn't see why not. I sent back a text of approval and smiled. Is this what having friends was like? Maybe. Kikamura and I sat in a restaurant together, sitting at a table, waiting on our food to be delivered. We'd already ordered a few things, and so far only had some water with us, but I wasn't too concerned about eating super soon. The main reason we went there together was to talk anyway. The blonde and I just kind of looked at each other for a moment. We were already done with small talk, so it was time to talk about the serious stuff. I was the one who asked our meetup to happen, so I probably needed to start things off before it got too awkward. I cleared my throat and began to speak. So... I scratched at the back of my neck, eyes looking from Kikamura to the table. I, failed my exams. I figured I'd get straight to the point, even though it felt a bit more difficult talking to her about it than it had been with Runaka. Initially, talking to her felt easier, mostly because we'd had more social opportunities together, but talking about what all happened the past few days seemed harder for some reason. Maybe I was worried she'd be disappointed in me or something.
Omochi, I'm so sorry.
Kikamura frowned at the news, her voice a bit lower and sad. So, I was pretty upset about it, especially since my parents told me to quit my job because of it. I continued, my eyes looking up to hers. Her eyes didn't look away from mine once, concern lacing her features. That's why I was kind of out of it when we all hung out. Sorry about that. My eyes looked away again, and even though Kikamura had offered me a smile.
It's okay, Amochi. I had no idea.
She assured me, her hands resting on the table. I decided to continue. And then the other day I got in a fight with my parents, so I went out to Renaka's place and we talked about it. He made some recommendations and I tried to talk to my parents again. I gulped. And it didn't go well that time either, and so I stared at the table and shrugged. I'm moving out.
What?
My last statement took Kikamura by surprise, and her mouth hung open.
You're moving out of your parents' house?
She confirmed what I said, looking to me with concern. I nodded at her and picked up my glass of water.
Where are you going to go?
Her voice sounded really concerned now. Well, actually... I looked away and stifled a small laugh. Runaka kind of offered, well, more like forced me to move in with him once he heard the news. I said. At that, Kikamura looked a little relieved, but still had some concern on her features.
Oh.
She blinked a few times before speaking up again.
So then, you'll be okay, right?
I should be, I think. I looked down at my water, drinking a bit from the cup. But I might not have as much free time once school starts up. I'm gonna talk to my boss about going full-time if possible. I'll need the money for bills and stuff. I looked up at Kikamura and realized something. This was probably the most her and I had ever spoke in one sitting.
Oh!
Kikamura looked delighted at my answer.
You're going to be a real professional, Amochi!
The girl beamed with a little naivety. It was kind of charming, though. I don't know about that, but I'll try my best, I said with a small smile, lowering my glass back down to the table. Kikamura suddenly jumped up, remembering something.
Oh, Amochi, you said you did badly on your exams, right? Maybe Hirose can help out.
The blonde lit up, smiling at her idea.
I know she has the power to help people do retakes of tests and stuff. Maybe she could help you out too?
The idea was a nice one, but firstly, I doubted I could retake my entire semester's worth of quizzes to actually help my score. And secondly, I couldn't imagine I made a good impression on her when we hung out. I probably came off as a rude, moody guy who had no consideration for anyone else but himself. I wouldn't blame anyone for thinking that either. I don't know about that. I think I'm a lost cause. I'll just have to work really hard before final exams and hope for the best. I shrugged. I already accepted my fate. There was no changing it. Kikamura, on the other hand, thought otherwise. She pulled out her phone and began aggressively texting. So this is how she responds back in 0.5 milliseconds.
I'm going to ask her anyway.
The girl grinned, setting her phone down on the table once she was done typing away. Well, it's not like it would hurt to ask. I shrugged in response and drank from my glass. A moment later, our food was brought to our table. I had gotten some unagi don, a rice dish with barbecue eel on top, as well as an order of takoyaki as per Kikamura's recommendation. The blonde got a bowl of ramen, a pork bowl by the looks of it, and also received a milkshake. Strawberry again? Do you really like strawberry? I asked. The blonde grinned and nodded quickly, slipping her straw inside the drink and taking a sip already. Her little body danced at her seat as she consumed the sweet drink, letting a satisfied sigh out as well.
Strawberry is my absolute favorite flavor,
she said, turning to her bowl of noodles before hearing her phone chirp out a short jingle vibrating on the table.
Oh!
Her eyes lit up and she immediately reached for her phone. The girl looked over the messages she'd received and started typing back. This went on for a little bit, back and forth between reading and texting, before the girl grinned at me, almost mischievously.
You can raise your exam result by a whole grade and a half if you do some extra credit and retake them.
Really? I could do that? I felt a little excited at the news. It would really help out. It would suck to have to study the whole semester's worth of work and then retake the exams on top of extra credit. But it could make my exam scores better. Plus, if that last semester went well, then it would open up the door to more university opportunities. I wouldn't have to worry about getting into a good patisserie school. I decided not to get my hopes up too high, though, and remained on the doubtful side of things. Are you sure? I asked her, raising an eyebrow and taking a bite of my food. She simply nodded once in response and typed away at her phone again. I couldn't help but wonder what it was that she was texting about, since it probably had to do with me. I wasn't going to ask, but I really wanted to know.
Okay.
Kikamura seemed to have finished her texting conversation, putting her phone away in her pocket. She looked onto her food, which was likely lukewarm by then.
Hirose says to see her once school starts up again. She said that she's got you taken care of.
Really? Is it really that easy to fix? Again, I didn't want to get my hopes up too high, but it was kind of nice to know I could actually fix my school problem. I started to think about where I might have been in my life if I hadn't met Kikamura and Runaka. A lot had happened, and both of them had helped me every step of the way. I felt my cheeks heat up in embarrassment. Jeez, they helped me a lot. I didn't even notice it until now.
You okay?
Kikamura spoke up as I hadn't responded. I was distracted by my own thoughts. Oh, yeah. Thanks, Kikamura. I'll see Hirose when school starts, I said, nodding to her and hiding a smile behind a single takoyaki before consuming it. Water time. All right. It was Christmas Eve at the cafe, and things were busy as usual. I was working a long shift to help keep everything in stock and to help push the last of the holiday-themed items. A lot of the ones I designed were selling well, and every time I saw one sell from the case up front, my chest warmed in happiness. I was so happy that things had worked out that well. There were only a few hours until close, so while things were slowing down, my boss called me into his office, leaving the kitchen to the lead bakery chef. I felt a little nervous entering the office, but to be honest, I knew it had to have been good news, so I didn't stress too much. Entering, I readjusted my collar on my shirt and fixed up my folded sleeves that had fallen down as I worked. That day, my boss was wearing a holiday-themed sweater, one that featured Santa Claus on it instead of his usual attire. It was pretty silly, but he was all for that cheesy holiday stuff. Once inside, my boss stood up from his seat and opened his arm. Kishka! He smiled widely, approaching me and coming in for a hug. The action wasn't entirely in character for him, but for some reason I wasn't too surprised either. I blame Runaka. He hugged me tightly, loosening up after a few seconds and grabbing my shoulders when he pulled away. I wasn't used to hugs, so my arms remained at my sides as he embraced me, which probably made it a little weird. Oops. This year was an absolute success and I have you to thank! His words were full of enthusiasm, and I could already feel my face heating up. As expected, everything you suggested for this year's seasonal items went over great, with all of our customers, and our sales skyrocketed. In addition to that, you and Muraki handled all these crowds so well. The man almost looked like he was going to cry. I'm so proud of you two. And then there's actually an illustration for this chapter. Let me show you. Here we go. I knew this year seemed to go well, and we were decently busy, but did we really deserve all the praise? I didn't know what to say. Thank you, I spoke in reply, bowing slightly. The amount of gratitude that my boss showed and the amount of satisfaction I had for being able to live up to his expectations really balanced out to a nice feeling. But, oh, was there actually a downside to all of this? My boss put his hands back down to his sides and reduced his smile slightly. I have a question to ask you. You can turn it down, and I won't be hurt, especially since you're still young and all. Now I was really curious. What was he going to ask? Muraki is starting a family and wants to drop down to part-time, so she can't really run the bakery by herself like that. My heart pounded in my chest. What was he getting at? I gulped and continued to listen. So, I was wondering if maybe you would be interested in being our new lead bakery chef. It would be a full-time position, so I understand if... I zoned out while my boss continued talking, completely taken off guard by his offer. Me? The head pastry chef in the cafe? Was this some sort of joke? There was no way that this offer was real. What sort of angel graced me with such an opportunity? I know you go to school right now and the hours might conflict, but I'll do it. I spoke up, eyes bright as I looked at him. A smile grew on my face and I felt butterflies coat the inside of my stomach. Was this happening? Was this really happening? I wasn't dreaming, right? My boss grinned wider at me, putting his hands on his hips. Great! The man laughed once more and shook his head. I really hoped you would say yes, but I'm just really glad you did. The boss looked out behind me, likely to the kitchen to make sure we weren't too busy. My boss then leaned in closer, lowering his voice. You have a lot of talent, kid. A lot. You've improved and succeeded in so many ways I never considered you would. You're made for this stuff, Kishka, and I can tell you have a passion for it. You're in it for the long run. Don't let that go. My boss leaned back again and smiled, patting me on the back. And get back out there. We'll talk later. We'll talk details after the holidays. With that, I turned around and entered back into the kitchen, staring down at my hands. I was going to be the lead pastry chef. My boss believed in me. My eyes teared up a bit as the happiness hit me, my hands shaking. There was a place for me, and it was right here, where I belonged. Once I entered the kitchen, last-minute business picked up, and the lead bakery, former lead bakery chef, and I got back to work. By the end of the day, our glass case was bare, our special orders were finished, and when we turned over the sign to close, we were all exhausted. We were done. Before all of the associates went home, my boss ordered takeout for us and gave everyone a card. He showed his appreciation and thanked every single one of us, and after we all cleaned the cafe, we were sent home. Leaving the cafe, I had the warmest, freest feeling in my chest, despite how cold the outside air was. This is my life, and I love it. I started to walk home and turned on my phone screen. As I did, I saw that I had a few unread texts. I was so caught up in work I didn't even know I had received them. Hopefully they weren't too important. Looking, I had one from Runaka and one from Kikamura. I opened Runaka's first. Hey, are you free tonight? My roommate is out with some classmates and I wanted to throw a little mini Christmas party. Wanna come over? I'll pick you up. I couldn't help but grin ever so slightly at his message, most especially his awkward, angry-looking smiley that he included. Before responding, I looked to see what Kikamura had said. Merry Christmas! Almost! I know you're probably working, but if you want to hang out tonight, I'm free. I have a gift for you. With a smiley face and a face with the O. A gift? For me? I felt my face flush in embarrassment. She didn't have to get me anything, especially after all she's done for me already. I scratched at the back of my head and tried to think of a response. I couldn't just not see her if she went through all that trouble. To be fair, I did get her something for Christmas too, but she wasn't supposed to know that. I decided to text the girl back first. Just got off of work. Renaka said something about a small Christmas party at his place. Wanna go? I didn't mention the whole gift ordeal. After all, it was supposed to be a surprise on my part. As expected, it didn't take long for Kikamura to respond, and within seconds I felt my phone vibrate in my hand. Sounds like fun! Happy face, happy face. Sure! Getting both of them together at once would be nice, especially since I wanted to tell them the news. The butterflies ran rampant in my stomach. I really couldn't believe it was happening. I was going to be the lead bakery chef of Cafe Misty. I texted Brunaka back and he agreed to picking Kikamura and myself up, which was kind of him. Once I got home, I didn't even bother going inside and just waited out front for him. I pulled up a game on my phone and tapped on the screen to pass the time. Eventually, Runaka arrived in his truck, Kikamura sitting in the passenger side. I climbed into the back seat and buckled up, the two smiling back at me. Merry Christmas! Runaka grinned, Kikamura quickly repeating after him. Merry Christmas, Munchie! The two didn't drop their happy moods the whole way back to Runaka's house, happily chatting the whole way. I indulged a little. It didn't feel too bad. Once we arrived at Runaka's apartment, Kikamura was quick to scope the place out. Not surprised. Ooh, so this is where Mochi's going to live, she cooed, looking down the hallways and into the open rooms. That might be a little rude. I didn't say anything, though. And it's where I live, too. Runaka rolled his eyes, mostly joking by the sound of it. Kikamura blushed a little and giggled. That too, that too! She made her way back to the living room, where Runaka and I stood, joining us as we began to relax. I took a seat down on the couch, looking around the place. It looked like Runaka had decorated it since I had last been there. There were red and green fairy lights strung from the tables and countertops and a mini Christmas tree set up just outside the kitchen. It had a few messily wrapped gifts underneath it. He was probably the one to have wrapped those if I had to guess. Runaka entered the kitchen that was just off of the living room, quickly returning with a few snacks. Chips and dip were the first thing he brought out, followed by some hot chocolate and a variety of other goodies. Geez, he really went all out, huh? I have some pudding sitting in the fridge right now. It's not done yet, but will be soon. In the meantime, dig in. The blue-haired man smiled at the girl and me, us both sitting and looking in awe at his spread. When he said mini party, he wasn't kidding. There was just the three of us inside the apartment, but it wasn't like I minded. I preferred only a few guests over a large group of people I didn't know. I leaned forward and picked up one of the mugs, smelling the sweet chocolatey aroma wafting from the top. I took a small sip, humming slightly to myself as the warm liquid hit my mouth. Suddenly, Christmas music started to play around us, completing the mood, but at the same time, it was kind of cheesy.
Ooh, speaker system?
Kikamura reacted, looking around at the magic that had happened before her. Runaka came out of the other room, laughing at Kikamura. Yeah, installed it just in time, the man said proudly. So he liked this sort of stuff too, huh? I smiled into my hot chocolate, the atmosphere already affecting me. We hadn't even done anything yet, and I was already having fun. Kikamura hummed along to one of the songs, playing before looking over at me.
What are you smiling at?
Kikamura called out, which made me jump and quickly change my expression. I struggled against my lips to show a calmer expression, it being very clear that I was having issues. What? Kishka can smile? No way, let me see! Runaka ran over, getting inches from my face, which immediately made me feel uncomfortable. I shrunk into the couch, frowning, both due to Runaka's closeness, but also because of the teasing. He's not smiling at all! Ropey, you lied to me! The man whined, frowning and backing up. Not anymore, I grumbled, relaxing when I was given some space. The two laughed in response, causing a small grin to adjust on my features for a moment once more. These two. Oh, there it is! Runaka noticed my grin, pointing towards my face. I immediately frowned again and the two erupted into a fit of giggles. Jeez. We sat around eating and participated in small talk for a little while until Kikamura spoke up to me.
So, how did work go?
She asked, eating some of her pudding. Runaka was now sitting at the couch with us, sitting next to Kikamura and eating away at the chips and dip. How did he stay so skinny if he ate like that? Oh, I guess by how often he worked, he probably needed the calories. Anyway, my heart nearly skipped a beat at the blonde's words, feeling excited to talk about my workday since I had big news. While I felt excited, I also wondered if I'd be judged for my decision. Working full-time, it would be hard to balance school. It went well, I started, looking down at my nearly finished cup of hot chocolate, and I was offered the lead bakery chef position. Kikamura immediately gasped, clapping her hands together.
Ah! Omochi, congratulations!
She beamed. I looked up to catch her gaze, looking to Runaka as he spoke up afterwards. That's great! Did you take it? He continued to eat more of the chips, gulping it down with a big swig from his mug. I looked down again and nodded. Yeah. My fingers ran over the top of the mug, considering my next words. Yeah! Runaka cheered.
Yay!
Kikamura giggled, placing her small hands on my leg and shaking it back and forth.
I'm so happy for you! Congratulations!
I jumped a little at her touch, which she noticed, the girl pulling her hands back and looking embarrassed. I didn't say anything about it, though. Thanks, I replied, not paying mind to the gesture and taking another sip of my hot chocolate, finishing it. Before nervousness took over, I took a deep breath and spoke the rest of my thoughts. But it's a full-time position, so I think I'm going to drop out of school to pursue this. Once the words came out, I braced myself for any judgmental words, knowing that it was a bit of a risk to walk the path I was choosing. Okay, maybe that was an understatement. It was a big risk. I could always try and go to school at the same time, but I didn't want to ruin my chances of pursuing the position full-time and furthering my career that had already begun. Oh! Runaka sounded, nodding. Kikamura didn't say anything for a second, so I looked up at her nervously. She had a finger tapping her chin, pondering.
Well, if you're doing something like a whole lot, if you're doing something you like a whole lot, and it's earning you money and experience, isn't that what you'd get after university anyway? Sounds like you're jumping over a hurdle and going straight into the game.
Kikamura said slowly, thinking out loud before looking at me and smiling.
We're so close to graduating though, so maybe it's not a bad idea to finish anyway?
The girl looked away and fidgeted a little.
Plus, I can't embarrass you during gym if you're not there for the rest of the semester.
Kikamura mumbled. The girl didn't seem entirely into my plan, but she didn't make it sound like she thought it was a stupid idea either. The blonde seemed happy for me, but also a little glum in tone. Was she really that upset that she wouldn't be able to see me at school every day at school? But why? What made me so special? I felt like I couldn't ask her those questions, at least not right then. While I didn't feel I would be crushed to not see her daily, it did make me feel a little lonely when I thought about not seeing her as often. Runaka looked over, raising an eyebrow, unaware of the whole gym situation for the month prior. The man shrugged it off quickly, taking his turn to speak. I mean, I didn't go to university, so I don't see why you shouldn't just drop out of school and focus on what you love. Runaka grinned, leaning past Kikamura to pat his knee. I'm proud of you, man. I knew you had it in you. His words made me feel all strange inside. It felt so foreign. I had spent such a long time doing things to make my parents and brother proud. I made sacrifices so that they could be happy. But now so many new people in my life were proud of me for doing what made me happy. Right then, my parents were neither proud nor happy with me, and it almost felt wrong. But maybe it just felt that way because I had never experienced it before. The new people in my life were making me look at things completely differently, but it didn't feel as scary as before. I smiled. Thank you, I replied to Rinaka, then turning my attention to Kikamura. I didn't want to cut her out of my life altogether. I wanted to find a happy medium, some way for her and I to still see each other. As long as it's okay with Rinaka, you could always come over and we could hang out after work, I said, shrugging and looking Rinaka's way. I had on my default expression again, letting the man of the house make the call. It was his apartment, not mine. I didn't want to overstep my boundaries. Rinaka grinned back, rolling his eyes. This place will be just as much yours as it will be mine here soon, he laughed. Of course it's okay with me. The man then wrapped his arm around Kikamura, rocking her back and forth. She seems like a good kid anyway. Better keep her around so she keeps you out of trouble. Kikamura blushed a little, pouting at Rinaka.
I don't think I could do that. He's harmless anyway,
she whined. Rinaka only laughed, leaving me to hide the small smile stretching across my face. These two, honestly. Once we had finished our snacks, Rinaka then brought out a dish of cupcakes, apparently trying to fatten us up or something. Was he a witch? I paid little mind to them until I noticed the familiar icing that topped them. Wait a minute. These are absolutely the ones from Cafe Misty. When did you come into the cafe? I whipped my head his way, being greeted with a big smirk. He laughed and shrugged. I may have stopped by the other day, he said, walking back towards the kitchen with his big suspicious grin. The other day? I questioned, squinting at the man. I must have been extra busy that day. There was no way I'd miss his bright blue hair in there. I started pondering. How could he have known which cafe I worked at? I continued to rack my brain watching him. Yeah, you told me all about how much you wanted to do that sort of thing, so I thought I'd drop by and see if you were as good as you thought you were. That's rude, I pouted, letting my internal thoughts spill from my lips. Rinaka burst out laughing, grabbing a couple gifts from under his small Christmas tree. Yeah, maybe, but you proved your worth. Those things are amazing. You do fantastic work, and I'm glad you're taking it seriously. The man walked over to me and Kikamura, tossing a present to each of us. I struggled to catch it, the package hopping between each of my hands before I could secure it in both. I pouted his way again. Rinaka only grinned. Kikamura grabbed hers, frowning a little.
Rinaka, I didn't get you anything, though.
The blonde looked sad, guilt visible on her face. The man shook his head in reply and gave her a thumbs up. Don't worry about it. I got it because I wanted to, not because I wanted something in return, he told her, sitting down next to me. Rinaka reached out and grabbed a cupcake, taking a big bite out of it. So fucking good. He grinned in between bites. I looked away, a bit embarrassed at being complimented up front for my sweets. Thanks, I mumbled, looking back to the gift in my hand. Before I had time to open my mouth again, Rinaka whined out loud. Anyway, open your presents already. The man impatiently rushed us, waving a hand out. Kikamura looked a little nervous at first, but eventually nodded and began unwrapping her gift. I decided to do so as well, ripping through the paper that was messily folded over itself and taped. As I ripped away, a box was visible. It was small and black. He wasn't going to propose to me, was he? I held back the urge to make a joke and opened it. Inside was a key ring. It had a house key on it, as well as a few other keychains. Upon closer inspection, one keychain had a little chef hat and a piece of cake hung from it, while the other had a tiny bag of sugar and a whisk hung from it. This... I spoke up before Rinaka clarified. Welcome home! You're free to move in whenever you're ready, all right? Rinaka grinned at me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders and bringing me close. I was speechless at first. Just like that, I was welcomed. Thank you, was all I could think to say. After that, Kikamura giggled, holding up her gift. From the look of it, Rinaka had gotten her a cute bag that was shaped like a cloud. It was white and blue and had a long pastel blue strap.
It's so cute, Rinaka, thank you,
she said with a big grin on her face. Rinaka laughed. Saw you looking at it while we were shopping around the other day. I hoped you didn't have it already.
Oh no, I don't. I actually don't own many bags, which is why I usually opt for things with pockets for my clothes, she admitted, laughing at herself. Thank you.
She smiled genuinely at Rinaka, him smiling back. We took a moment to admire our presents.
Well,
Kikamura suddenly stood up, looking away from us.
If we're doing gifts, I want to do mine too.
Kikamura looked over, but looked straight to Rinaka first.
Like I said,
I don't have anything for you, but... The girl seemed awfully sheepish all of a sudden, which was pretty out of character for her. I wondered what was up. The blonde reached behind her, grabbing a gift she'd apparently had beside her the whole time. I was surprised that I hadn't noticed, actually. She thrust the gift towards me, having a hard time holding my gaze, which I felt was peculiar. Raising an eyebrow, I took the gift from her, setting the one Runaka gifted me on the table before slowly opening hers. Kikamura's wrapping was tidy, every corner folded tight and neat. It looked like she put a lot of care into it. Ripping off the decorative paper, it revealed a box yet again. This one was a fair bit bigger than the last, however. Opening the lid, I noticed it was a clothing item. I took the item out of the box and it quickly unfolded, revealing a familiar product. Wait a minute. It was the apron that Kikamura had pointed out in the shop when all of us went out together. I said it was for me and my dad, but I lied. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure you didn't hate it, she confessed. Honestly, I was surprised that she could tell that I didn't hate it, considering how disinterested I must have seemed throughout that trip. I felt a little emotional being gifted something so thoughtful. I ran my fingers over the seams, noting how well it was made. There were certain parts made of leather, and the rest was made of a high-quality and durable cloth. It couldn't have been cheap without sort of care put into it. After inspecting it, I realized I'd left Kikamura hanging. Thank you, Kikamura. This is really nice. I smiled a little, folding the item back up and setting it in the box. I wonder if I could ask my boss to wear it at work. You didn't have to get me anything, but this was a nice surprise, I told her. I knew my tone probably never sounded convincing, so I attempted to use words to express how I felt as much as possible that time. I had heard enough feelings for a lifetime. It looked like my words had conveyed my appreciation well, because Kikamura was beaming once they left my lips. Yay! I'm so glad you like it! She said, balling her hands into fists as she rocked back and forth on her feet next to me. I couldn't stop smiling that moment. It's so weird. Since everyone else had taken their turn in gift-giving, I figured I would as well. While I bought Kikamura's gift a few days prior, I had rushed to find something for Runaka before I went home earlier that day. It was kind of lame, but I was hoping the thought was what counted. I stood up and walked over by the front door of Runaka's apartment, unzipping my backpack that I'd taken with me. I pulled out 2 gift bags, both that were wrapped by store associates, not myself. I didn't trust myself to do a good job. I walked back over to the couch and handed Runaka his gift first. You actually got me something? The man seemed surprised. I thought I'd been the only one. I thought that I had been the only sneaky one. He laughed. The blue-haired man peeked into the bag at first, a curious look on his face, before he grinned and took out the tissue paper that was covering the item out. Pulling out what was hidden in the bag, he grinned. Aha! I had purchased him a few different kinds of tank tops. He had worn them about half the time I saw him, so I figured he might find use in some new ones. I thought you might like some, but if not, I provided the receipt. I also guessed on your size. I didn't know much about Runaka, which made it hard to shop for him, but I did what I felt I could. He deserved at least a little something. Runaka grinned wider than as he looked over the shirts, glancing at the size. He laughed. You must be one lucky guy, Kishka. You got my size just right. Thank you. He folded them up and put them back in the bag. I was actually just thinking I needed some new ones. The ones I have are getting a bit ratty. Thank you, man. He reached out to pat me again, but this time he hesitated, softly patting me instead of his usual firm pat. Maybe he finally noticed he was knocking the wind out of me every time. When I looked at Kikamura, she had on the most interesting face. While she looked like she was focused on Runaka's and I's exchange, her face was bright red, and she was constantly bouncing in her seat. I got the feeling that she was pretty excited. It was pretty cute. Here you go, I said as I held her gift bag out to her. Her facial expression didn't change, her shakily grabbing the bag and bringing it close. She kind of hugged the bag against herself a little before opening it. I didn't really get it, but I didn't question it. She had her quirks. Moving the tissue paper out of the bag, Kikamura frantically revealed her gift, pulling out a small orange monkey plush. Her eyes teared up immediately, and she held the monkey tight in her arms. Oh no! It's perfect! She cried. Literally. Tears were running down her face. Huh? I jumped to the side, unsure why she was responding so emotionally to such a silly gift. Runaka immediately began cracking up. I leaned over to her, worried. Are you okay? I asked, worried. Did she not like it? Or was she just really emotional? The crying girl looked to me, nodding and sniffling, even though it didn't really calm my nerves. I love it. He's so cute. But why did you get me a present? the girl cried, hiccuping between her words. Oh, jeez. What do you mean? It's Christmas. I saw it in the store and thought of you, and oh my god, you were thinking of me! Kikamura cried harder, holding the monkey tight and falling over onto the couch, laying on her side while hugging the plush animal and sobbing. I didn't know how to respond, overwhelmed by her reaction. Runaka was laughing hard, not able to take the bizarre situation any longer. I wish I could have laughed the situation off too, but I couldn't help but feel concerned. I'd never made someone else cry before. Are you sure you're okay, Kikamura? I asked, leaning over and very gently touching her shoulder. The girl nodded quickly, using one of her hands to wipe some tears off of her face. What on earth did I get myself into? Eventually, Kikamura calmed down and we all went back to hanging out and chatting. I guess she was just really happy to receive a gift from me or something. She didn't really explain it, but I guess I couldn't complain. Once it started to get late, Runaka drove us all home and I went to bed, ending the happy and busy day. Christmas is tomorrow. I have a feeling it's going to be a big day. And that is the end of chapter 7.